Hey, welcome, David here. Starting early today. Have a lot to cover, and so I got to start early. I wanted to get this off my desk, and Brundle mentioned to just do it today. So this might be over 3 hours because there's a lot of material. I got a lot of PowerPoints, a lot of everything. So just got to start now. A lot to cover. Let me just enter a screen share. We're going to be talking about universal basic income and automation. And they're connected in a certain way. Like obviously, universal basic income has been around for centuries, and we're going to look at the history, the origin of the idea, without going back to like classical biblical reference, but at least to Renaissance Europe and state of corporate welfare or utopian society, and the connection to automation that at a certain level you need uh, automation to allow this universal basic income. Historical times, you didn't have enough bounty to allow such a concept as everyone just getting paid whether they accomplish or not. And so that's largely based on automation. And Andrew Yang, the most popular proprietor of this in the U.S. today, connects the two. So I'm going to cover both topics, and you'll see that they're interrelated. I have a lot of PowerPoints, a lot of data, a lot of presentations. Hopefully Brundle's going to join at some point. Not sure what his schedule is, but this might be as much as 3 hours. So start right away. So let me first put it on screen share. So it'll take me a minute or two to get used to talking like this. It's going to be hours of this, and maybe some other people come on, give my voice a rest. So here is something in Germany, modern. I'm going to put in the link, but like a robot that teaches could go into your class, administer your test, give you your grades. If you had like a computer program that most people in university courses, you get your grades and your assignments and everything straight from the computer. So this is an interesting documentary. It's in German, translated to English just to show. And you're saying a lot of automation will not be limited to the field of robotics and manual labor, although we predict that actually the majority of automation is going to occur in fields that are intellectual, repetitive, that the computer is going to have an easier time automating away intellectual endeavors than it will to automate away manual labor. And we're going to look at that. And, so quick documentary. Let me just pop away some PowerPoints. Here's you're just towards the National Universal Guaranteed Basic Income PowerPoint I found. History. I'm going to show you a long-range history, philosophical, but here U.S. Begins a series of negative income tax experiments in different states as part of Johnson's war on poverty. So it's already in the 60s, 1971. What exactly is a negative income tax? And that's actually similar to universal income, basic income, where if you make under a certain amount, you actually get a negative income tax and you get a check from the government. And so we'll look at the difference of those in a bit. 1971, Special Senate Committee on Poverty recommends federal guaranteed annual income following EEC report on poverty. 74-9, the federal government jointly finance MB basic annual income experiment in Macomba. So a federal government experimented in a certain region, and we'll see how that went. In Canada, had similar experience. 1985, McDonald Royal Commission recommends universal income security program with free trade. So the McDonald Commission recommended welfare reforms to improve social equity and economic efficiency, replace most existing income support programs with a guaranteed income program designed like a negative income tax, guaranteed adjusted for family size, implicit negative tax or benefit reduction rate. So this from the report, Development Prospects for Canada in 1985. The replacement of most of our current income security programs and several of our tax exemptions and deductions would allow the government of Canada to make available in 1985 a basic income guarantee of $2,750 per adult and $750 per child. Benefits would be reduced at a rate of $20 per each $100 of other income. The elderly would receive an enriched option. It would replace the following existing programs: guaranteed income supplement, family allowance, child tax credits, married exemption, child exemptions, the federal share of Canada Assistance Plan, social assistance, and eventually federal social housing programs. If the personal income tax exemption were eliminated, the income guarantee could be raised to $3,825 per adult and $765 per child. This was in 1985. Obviously, Andrew Yang is talking about $1,000 per month, and part of the payment mechanism will be the elimination of other welfare programs. So that was never enacted. There were a few programs that were tested. You had modest tax reforms. You could see, those the dates. This in Canada. So let's get a few definitions out there. You have horizontal equity. Individuals with the same financial circumstance should pay the same. Vertical equity, individuals with greater ability to pay should pay more, like progressive. Individuals literally or families. Marriage neutrality, a bunch of things to consider. We'll focus on the average amount of income support received per adult across 6 family types. And anyone who's dealt with governmental stuff, realize the classification measures, or you fill out your taxes. Taxes are due in 2 weeks. So here's just some financial data. I might go more into the actual numbers later, but here would be examples of the type of cost that would cost for these prices, and this was Canadian example. In here it would be like family size. The more people you have in the family, the different total number. I'm going to show some reports, but so we're going to have to cover some actual numbers. So let me keep on going just to cover some of this basic stuff. Let's get a connection to workforce development in the age of automation, artificial intelligence. This one's also from Canada. Canada might be further along. Here's just a picture of an automated factory building cars, almost all robots, no people. So automation, artificial intelligence, automation and AI are here and will grow exponentially over the next 5 to 20 years. Low-skilled jobs are already being automated and will be hit en masse. Assembly, packaging. Middle-skilled jobs are partially automatable already and will be near full automation in the next decade or two as AI advances. Things like paralegals. Even high-skilled jobs are at risk, according to top futurist tech titans in economic studies. Different studies, we're going to look at it, to say almost 50% of all jobs are at risk of being automated away within the next 20 years. And we'll look at this study from Oxford. I'll put that in the links in the famous study of 2013. Here's kind of like young millennials, what they think their jobs they're going to get versus today's workforce. People who would previously desired to be office administrative support occupation. No millennials desire those jobs, and they're probably not necessary with the technology. Even sales jobs, sales might be a thing of the past. It's all going to be automated. Food preparation, transportation, moving type things that just unlikely these jobs are going to exist long term. So is it possible to have a jobless future? So you got Ray Kurzweil, renowned futurist, Google's top engineering director, sees robots as a force for good, at least in terms of freeing people up to do what it is they love. By the 2030s, AI will outpace biological intelligence and self-driving cars will be everywhere. We're going to have new types of jobs and new types of dollars that don't exist yet, and that has been the trend. Obviously, last week I did my study session on driverless cars, and we saw the rollout phases and what currently exists in technology. So what do we got to do? Raise awareness, generate excitement about coding. Learn to code, be excited about learning to code. A liberal arts enthusiast, encourage focus on marketable skills. IT networking, support, graphic design, data analysis, management. Look at the difference in skills set for just 2015 to 2020. What skills are top 10 in 2015 versus 2020? At the top is Complex problem solving, coordinating with others is going down as with automation. Critical thinking is going up. Creativity is going up and becoming more important. What might be skills brokers, match employers with employees. Grants, determining what startups are, direction of technology, people managing that, funding. So solutions, we're going to get into, the universal basic income, why that's a solution to automation, call a new deal for the 21st century. Study by the Council of Foreign Relations, equip young people with education and skills to adapt to career changes, provide retraining for older workers, tax incentives of insurance, facilitate job mobility, reform occupation licensing, career loan accounts with repayment linked to future earnings, wage insurance, direct wage subsidies, minimum wage increments. The civilian national service programs alleviate social disruption, teaches new skills, helps those in need, invest in public infrastructure improvements. And so, okay, there might be universal basic income, but what if that required you to actually, join some sort of civil, not necessarily military, but civil service to the state for a few years? So universal basic income experiments currently taking place in communities worldwide, like Oakland, California. It's not a new idea. Even President Nixon considered it. We'll look at Alaska's permanent fund, which distributes dividends to every resident to share wealth from states' natural resources. And obviously people like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, top technocrats, are discussing it, and we'll see what their reason is. Okay, so got a few people, got 6 people watching, and I appreciate you tuning in. We'll see if Brundle joins or anyone else joins in soon. And I'm just going to keep on going because there's really a lot of material to show. And let's look at another PowerPoint. Technological unemployment and basic income, the future of work. Another presentation. Got a lot of these, just show the same information from different perspectives to help people understand it. So we're going to look at some surveys. How much people are going to be put out employed by automation? Some people say up to 80%, 40%. It's unclear. There's different estimates. You could see the Pew survey, percent of adults who say in the next 50 years, robots and computers will do much of the work currently done by humans. And majority, 65%, say probably. And percentage of workers who think that their professions will not exist in 50 years, almost 80% of people think that's likely. Different ways of framing the type fields that are done and the type automation, from repetitiveness and complexity, that the more repetitive and less complex something is, the more likely it's going to be automated away. And that doesn't just apply to physical labor and manufacture, but in fact that's going to apply more to intellectual labor, that if it's not complex and repetitive, a computer will do it far better than us. So workers falling behind. We'll see different charts. We're going to look, where the idea come from. I'm going to show more, Thomas More's Utopia, going back, Thomas Paine. Dr. King actually talked about this, Milton Friedman, Hayek. All these ideas have been around for a long time. Social movements, basic income, even the early feminist movement had talked about the effect of automation, industrialization, and possibilities for universal basic income 100 years ago. And this has actually been experimented internationally at levels way below Andrew Yang's, like $1,000 a month, maybe like $7 a month or something like that. But India, Kenya, Canada, Finland have all had experiments with this, and we'll try to look at some of those. So let's look at a few different possibilities for how this might work. You have universal basic income. All citizens, legal residents get a fixed income payment every month. The amount should be enough to cover bare necessities, food, housing, and basic utilities. There's no means of testing, no work requirement. And then you have a negative income tax. Government sets a minimum tax level. Everyone above it owes taxes. Everyone beneath it gets money back. So the negative income tax recipients get a percentage of their deficit back. No new infrastructure, just IRS, still incentive to work. So universal basic dividend, as opposed to income in the universal basic dividend, all citizens, residents become the beneficiaries of the broader economic activity, like shareholders. Economic achievements is collective achievement, technological inheritance. And then you have guaranteed minimum income. There's a floor of minimum income ensured for all citizens, legal residents. Citizens that make less, they get the remaining amount in the payment from the government. This option is cheaper than UBI. So how does it pay for? Get rid of welfare spending, borrowing, high interest, quantitative easing, these type things that we've done in the past that cost a bunch of money will no longer need to do. And then there might be other taxes on different things: carbon taxes, land, natural resources, automation tax, robot tax, big data tax, capital gains tax. So Silicon Valley is the technocracy is one of the most pushing of this. Oakland, California has been giving 100 families $2,000 a month for a year, pilot program. So here's some books on it. People want to learn more. Andrew McAfee favored negative income tax because it insulates people from extreme poverty, while also not dramatically adding to the government bureaucracies or disincentivizing work. Martin Ford favors UBI that is incentivizing bonuses, complete high school and participate in volunteer work, for example. Jerry Kaplan recommends distributing ownership of publicly traded companies by using tax incentive, making everyone a direct beneficiary of economic activity. And Schrenek and Williams suggest using a UBI that scales over time towards the end of work. You have shorter week work, job guarantee, distributed ownership, public investments in skills, regulation against automation. Okay, so some interesting stuff. Let me get a little economic here. So here is your S-curve. Anyone knows economics? Here's what's called the S-curve of the poverty trap. And if you see here, like the two dots, that if you're below this first dot, you're likely to fall back into poverty. That no matter how much, when you start, let's say you have no money at all or even debt, and you start making a certain amount, and this is more international, where you have income from work versus inherited income. And, so if you're making like $100 a month or something like that, it's not going to be enough to raise you out of poverty, and you're going to fall back. You're below the point on the S-curve, you're going to fall back into poverty. But if you pass this point on the curve, you're likely to be able to remain because that little amount of money that you're making will not be enough to sustain your activities, and you're, as they say, a paycheck away from poverty. Any bad thing that's going to slip you away, you're going to go back to, God forbid, having absolutely nothing. And this has been studied economically, and there's different ways, and we'll look more at the economics, the universal basic income. So I'll just read this. This is from MIT Open Course, so we compare the different curve. There's something specific about figure 1. The S-shaped curve intersects the 45-degree line from below. For poor people, income grows slowly, so slowly that income tomorrow is below income today, that poor people become poorer up to a point. At some point, the rate of growth of income starts increasing. Income yesterday becomes larger than income today. The middle class and the somewhat rich continue to be rich. This will be the key thing to look for. Note the double feedback loop. You got poor nutrition, lower your income. Low income means you cannot buy a lot of food. Does not always need the poverty trap. The relation has to be sufficiently strong. So, Jeffrey Sachs, the head of the UN, and we're going to look at some of the UN goals. So there's a lot of information, but just understand this curve, that part of the purpose of universal basic income is to allow people to, so to say, learn to code. That if you're in extreme worries about poverty, that you're constantly needing to work just to survive, and you can't learn the more important skills, to essentially raise you out of poverty, and hence the benefit of a universal stipend income that would allow people to not feel that pressure of just needing to work to survive. Okay, let's keep it going. More slides. Put this one in the chat. People want to follow along. Some good graphics here. Okay, we talk about robots. Robot to worker ratios are rising rapidly in factories around the world. For example, Korea has almost 5 robots per 100 workers. In the United States, it's 1.6 robots per 100 workers. China, it's 0.36. So, the amount of robots, Korea is one of the most automized countries in the world, with close to 5 robots per people. Cost of implementation of robots is shrinking fast, going down extremely quickly. And who's at risk of their jobs being taken away by automation? It's actually the less developed countries, because as I said, the simple, repetitive, less skilled things are easier to automate. So even a place like Ethiopia, 80% of all jobs could be eliminated by automation. Global average 57%. Even the developed world's not much better off. Consider a place like Las Vegas, close to 50% of jobs are at risk. Think like dealers at a casino type things. Those could easily be automated. You don't really need a person doing it. New York City, 40%, stockbrokers and financial things, insurance. A lot of these things, here's the problems bigger than manufacturing. Insurance underwriting, really 99% of those jobs could be eliminated because the computer's just better at checking the data, double checking it, doing the calculations. Farm labor, 97% of jobs. Fast food cooks, that highly likely to be automated. Construction is only 88%. Delivering mail, truck driving. So we've discussed this a few times. Let's look at Alaska. Alaska implemented its own brand of basic income since 1982. It's called the Permanent Fund Dividend, which is derived from earnings on investment in Alaska Permanent Fund, or portfolio of diversified assets. Market fluctuations affect the Alaska Permanent Fund investments, so the amount given to Alaskan residents also varies. Some countries like oil-rich countries like Qatar, I believe, have similar type things where all citizens get some amount of the oil money. And so just being a citizen allows you to share the wealth from the resources that's being extracted from the land. So since implementation, spending and saving regularly increase around the time the dividends are distributed. Increase in purchasing power has resulted in 10,000 additional jobs for the state. Poverty rate among Native Americans has fell from 25% to 19%. Only 1% of Alaskans report that they work less because of the dividends. So we see it's not necessarily like a welfare. It enables people to work more and work in the fields they want. In Nambia, 2008, church groups, NGO, and labor unions in Nambia launched a small pilot program in this region, fairly typical village beset by crime and poverty, called Basic Income Grant Coalition. It provided every resident of the village with a basic monthly income. Proportion of malnourished children dropped from 42% to 10%. Poverty rate has dropped from 86 to 68. Average earned income beyond UBI has increased by 29%. Crime has dropped by 36.5%. Harper Lee, 1956, a struggling writer named Harper Lee received an envelope from family friends with a year's salary. It read, "You have 1 year off from your job to write whatever you please." She would use her time to pen To Kill a Mockingbird. While not a universal basic income by definition, many proponents of UBI highlight Lee's story to showcase the creativity that can result from income security. So 2016, the year of UBI, Kenya, nonprofit called Give Directly announces the world's first true universal basic income experiment. 30 million program will distribute an unconditional monthly benefit to 6,000 people in sub-Saharan Africa and will last 10 to 15 years. Finland Social Insurance Institution released a preliminary report on universal basic income. The group recommended a 2-year pilot that would distribute a €550 monthly wage to 10,000 working adults. Switzerland Swiss Ministry of Social Security revealed that it would cost just $25 billion to provide a UBI to the country. June 5th, the Swiss government will vote on a referendum that could give citizens as much as 2,500 francs per month, well more than the Yang Gang. Netherlands, 4 cities in the Netherlands are planning UBI experiments for 2016. Utrecht See What Works program would conduct an experiment that would give citizens $980. One group would receive it unconditionally, while others would be required to volunteer or not work at all. Some quotes. Martin Luther King: I'm now convinced that the simplest solution to poverty is to abolish it directly by a new, widely discussed measure, the guaranteed income. Bertrand Russell: a certain small income sufficient for necessities should be secured for all, whether they work or not. Paris Levine: basic income should simplify things in that it removes the need to determine who is really deserving of our help. Hayek, Austrian Economics: the assurance of certain minimum income for everyone, or a sort of floor below which nobody need fall, even when he is unable to provide for himself, appears not only to be wholly legitimate protection against a risk common to all, but a necessary part of the great society in which the individual no longer has specific claims on the members of the particular small group into which he was born. And Thomas Paine: there should be paid to every person when arrived at the age of 21 years, the sum as a compensation in part for the loss of his or her natural inheritance by the introduction of the system of landed property to every person, rich or poor, because in lieu of the natural inheritance, which as a right belongs to every man, over and above the property he may have created or inherited from those who did. So you see a lot of these ideas go back a long time. Okay, you got 8 people watching. Look at some of the chat. So I got a lot of information here. We'll see, Brundle's going to pop on maybe, noon or quite a bit longer. So let's look at this famous Oxford, kind of the definitive study of 2016. The future of employment, how susceptible are jobs to computerization? This way, at Oxford University, we examine how susceptible jobs are to computerization. To assess this, we begin by implementing a novel methodology to estimate the probability of computerization for 702 detailed occupations using a Gaussian process classifier. Based on these estimates, we examine expected impacts of future computerization on U.S. labor market outcomes, with the primary objective of analyzing the number of jobs at risk and the relation between an occupation's probability of computerization, wages, and educational attainment. According to our estimates, about 47% of total U.S. employment is at risk. We further provide evidence that wages and educational attainment exhibit a strong negative relationship with occupations' probability of computerization. So, this is a long paper, 70-some pages. I'm not going to read it, but it's also mathematical. I have a McKinsey report that has, very nice graphics and will show this better. But this Oxford paper was one of the definitive papers on the subject going back to 2013. So I encourage the more intellectual people to try to read that paper. This one I'm going to read quite a bit from. I showed this on Brundle's show the other week about this is the history of basic income, and the BN is the Basic Income Earth Network that has a whole bunch of research on it, and you could see studies like on the different experiments and a whole bunch of papers. For those who want to learn more about it, I suggest that you flip through a whole bunch of reading material. So let's see some of the long history. I didn't have enough time to go back into like ancient times and compare the ancient philosophies to what would be considered universal basic income. So we're going to have to start with Renaissance Europe. History of basic income. The idea of unconditional basic income has 3 historical roots. The idea of minimum income first appeared at the beginning of the 16th century. The idea of an unconditional one-off grant first appeared at the end of the 18th century, and the two were combined for the first time to form an idea of unconditional basic income near the middle of the 19th century. Minimum income, the humanist Moore and Vives. So Raphael's cure for theft, the idea of minimum income guaranteed by the government to all the members, a particular community is far older than most more specific and radical idea of an unconditional basic income. With the advent of the Renaissance, the task of looking after the welfare of the poor people ceased to be regarded as the exclusive preserve of the church and charitative individuals. Some of the so-called humanists started playing with the idea of a minimum income in the form of public assistance. In Thomas More's Utopia, published in Louvain in 1516, the Portuguese traveler Rafael Nonsensko, walking on a central square of the city of Antwerp, narrates a conversation he says he had with John Morton, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Such a scheme, he argued, would be a more astute way of fighting theft than sentencing thieves to death, which had been an unpleasant side effect of the increasing murder rate. Here's the quote from Thomas More. I once happened to be dining with the Cardinal when a certain English lawyer was there. I forgot how the subject came up, but he was speaking with great enthusiasm about the stern measures that were then being taken against thieves. We're hanging them all over the place, he said. I've seen as many as 20 on a single gallows, and that's what I find so odd, considering how few of them get away with it. How come we are still plagued with so many robbers? What's odd about it, I asked, for I never hesitated to speak freely in front of the Cardinal. This method of dealing with thieves is both unjust and undesirable. As a punishment, it's too severe, and as a deterrent, it's quite ineffective. Petty larceny isn't bad enough to deserve the death penalty, and no penalty on earth will stop people from stealing if it's their only way of getting food. In this respect, you English, like most other nations, remind me of these incompetent schoolmasters who prefer caning their pupils to teaching them. Instead of inflicting these horrible punishments, it would be far more to the point to provide everyone with some means of livelihood so that nobody is under the frightful necessity of becoming first a thief and then a corpse. A pragmatical theological plea for public assistance. However, Thomas More's close friend and fellow humanist, Johannes Vives, who should be regarded as the true father of the idea of guaranteed minimum income, it was he the first to work out a detailed scheme and develop a comprehensive argument for it based both on theological and pragmatic consideration. Vives was born in Valencia in a family of converted Jews. He left Spain in 1509 to escape the Inquisition, studied at the Sorbonne, but soon got fed up with the conservative scholastic philosophy that was prevailing in Paris at the time and moved on to Bourges in 1512 and 1517 to Louvain, one of the main centers of the humanist movement, where he was appointed professor in 1520. He taught more briefly at Corpus Christi College, Oxford, but spent most of his adult life in the city of Bourges, where his statue can be seen on the bank of one of the main canals. In a memoir addressed to the mayor of Bourges in 1526 under the title On the Assistance to the Poor, he proposed that the municipal government should be given the responsibility of securing subsistence minimum to all of its residents, not on grounds of justice, but for the sake of a more effective exercise of morally required charity. The assistance scheme would be closely targeted to the poor. Indeed, it is because of their ability to target them more efficiently that public officials should be put in charge of poor relief. To be entitled to the latter, a poor person's poverty must not be undeserved, but he must deserve the help he gets by providing his willingness to work. So here's the quote from what the BN is calling the father of UBI, a Jew who converted to Catholicism. Even those who have dissipated their fortunes and dissolute living through gaming, harlots, excessive luxury, gluttony, and gambling should be given food, for no one should die of hunger. However, smaller rations and more irksome tasks should be assigned to them so that they may be examples to others. They must not die of hunger, but they must feel its pangs. Whatever the source of poverty, the poor are expected to work. Even the old and the stupid, it should be possible to give a job they can learn in a few days, such as digging holes, getting water, or carrying something on their shoulders. The point of requiring such toil from the beneficiaries of the scheme is in part to make them contribute to the funding of the latter, but is also to make sure that being busy or engrossed in their work, they will abstain from those wicked thoughts and actions in which they would engage if they were idle. Indeed, this concern should consistently extend to those born rich, and Emperor Justinian was right, according to Vives, in imposing a law that forbade everyone to spend his life in idleness. If the poor cannot be parasites, why could the rich? At two junctions, Vives anticipates some insights that will drive later thinkers in the direction of basic income. All these things God created, he put them in our large home, the world, without surrounding them with walls and gates, so that they would be common to all his children. Hence, unless he helps those in need, whoever has appropriated some of the gifts of nature is only a thief condemned by natural law, because he occupies and keeps what nature has not created exclusively for himself. Further, Vives insists that relief should come before need induces some mad or wicked action, before the face of the needy blushes from shame. The benefaction that precedes the hard and thankless necessity of asking is more pleasant and more worthy of thanks, but he explicitly discards the more radical conclusion that it would be even better if the gift were made before the need arose, which is exactly what an adequate basic income would achieve. So from Vives to the Poor Law, Vives please explicitly inspired a scheme put into place a few years later by Flemish municipality of Yvres. It also contributed to inspiring incipient thinking and action about forms of poor relief from the school of Salamanca of Francisca in Dominica de Soto to English poor laws in 1576. Less well remembered than his friends and protectors, Erasmus and more, Vives' pioneer thinking on the welfare state has been recently rediscovered. He is also still remembered his alma mater, the University of Louvain. The stone from his house has been incorporated in the wall of the University Hall, which houses the rectorate in the old town of Louvain, and the meeting room for the Chang Hoover in the new town of Louvain-la-Neuve, where the Caliph Charles Fourier met to discuss basic income and organize the founding meeting of the Basic Income European Network. Vives' tract is the first systemic expression of a long tradition of social thinking and institutional reform focused on the public exercise of compassion through government-organized means, tested schemes directed at the poor. Despite the difficulties and doubts aroused by the operation of poor laws, the thinkers in the Nouvelle regime made public assistance an essential function of the government. Thus, Montesquieu, the state owes all its citizens a secure subsistence, food, suitable clothing, and a way of life that does not damage their health. The line of thought eventually led to the setting up of comprehensive, nationally funded, guaranteed minimum income schemes in a growing number of countries, most recently France's RAM and Portugal. So you see that this society, the RBN, actually was built upon this Jewish convert to Christianity's ideas hundreds of years ago. So let's keep on going. Basic endowment, the Republican Condorcet and Paine. Condorcet and social insurance. However, towards the end of the 18th century, a different idea emerged that was to play an even greater role in the alleviation of poverty throughout Europe. The first known person to have sketched the idea is the first-rate mathematician and political activist Antoine Caratat, Marquis de Condorcet. After having played a prominent role in the French Revolution, both as a journalist and as a member of the convention, Condorcet was imprisoned and sentenced to death. While in prison, he wrote his most systemic work, published posthumously by his widow in 1795. Sorry, my French is not so great. Whose last chapter contains a brief sketch on what social insurance might look like and how it could reduce inequality, insecurity, and poverty. There is therefore a necessary cause of inequality, of dependency, and even of misery, which constantly threatens the most numerous and most active class of our societies. We shall show that we can, to a large extent, remove it by opposing luck to itself, by securing to those who reach old age a relief that is the product of what he saved, but increased by the savings of those individuals who made the same sacrifice but died before the time came for them to need to collect its fruit, by using a similar compensation to provide women and children at the moment they lose their husbands or fathers with resources at the same level and acquired at the same price, whether the family concerned was afflicted by a premature death or could keep its head for longer, and finally by giving to those children who became old enough to work by themselves and found a new family the advantage of capital required by the development of their activity and increased as the result of some dying too early to be able to enjoy it. It is the application of calculus to the probabilities of life and the investment of money that one owes to the idea of this method. The latter has already been successfully used, but never on the scale and with the variety of forms that would make it really useful, not merely to a handful of individuals, but to the entire mass of society. It would free the latter from the periodic bankruptcy of a large number of families, that inexhaustible source of corruption and misery. This distinct idea, which will end up inspiring 1 century later the birth and development of Europe's massive social insurance systems, starting with Otto von Bismarck's old age pension and health insurance schemes for the labor force of unified Germany from 1883 onwards. Though not targeted to the poor and involving massive transfers to the non-poor, these systems soon started having a huge impact on poverty, as their development quickly dwarfed public assistance schemes and relegated them to a subsidiary role. In one way, social insurance brought us closer to the basic income than public assistance, as the social benefits it's distributed were not prompted by compassion, but by entitlement, based in the case of the premiums paid into the insurance system. But another way, it took us away from basic income precisely because entitlement to the benefits is now based on having paid enough contributions in the past, typically in the form of some percentage of one's wage. For this reason, unlike the most comprehensive versions of public assistance, even the most comprehensive forms of social insurance cannot provide a basic guaranteed minimum income. So Conrad and Payne on basic endowment. However, in the very same it's the very same Marcus de Condorcet who was the first to briefly mention in the context of his discussion of social insurance the idea of a benefit restricted neither to the poor nor to the insured, namely the idea of giving to those children who became old enough to work by themselves and found new family the advantage of capital required by the development of their activity. Condorcet himself is not known to have said or written anything else on the subject, but his close friend and fellow member of the convention, Thomas Paine, developed the idea in far greater details 2 years after Condorcet's death in a memoir addressed to the director of five-member executive that ruled France during the period separating the beheading of Robespierre to the rise of Napoleon. So Thomas Paine. It is not that to be controverted, he writes, that the earth in its natural uncultivated state was and ever would have continued to be the common property of the human race. As the land gets cultivated, it is the value of the improvement only, and not the earth itself, that is the individual property. Every proprietor, therefore, of cultivated lands owes to the community a ground rent, for I know of no better term to express the idea, for the land which he holds, and it is from this ground rent that the fund proposed in this plan is to issue. Out of this fund there shall be paid to every person when arrived at the age of 21 years the sum of 15 pounds sterling as a compensation in part for the loss of his or her natural inheritance. By the introduction of the systems of landed property, and also the sum of 10 pounds per annum during life to every person now living of the age of 50 years, and to all others as they shall arrive at that age, payments, Paine insists, must be made to every person, rich or poor, because it in lieu of the natural inheritance which as a right belongs to every man, over and above the property he may have created or inherited from those who did. Okay, from Paine to stakeholder society, the idea of an equal basic endowment given to all as they reach adulthood has reappeared now and then, for example, writing the French political philosophers Huet, and the attempt to combine liberalism and socialism. He proposed that young people shall all be given an endowment financed out of the taxation of the whole, and that part of the land and other property which the bequeather himself received. The same endowment idea, combined as it was with Paine with basic pension, has been more recently revived in the development in great detail by the Yale Law School professors Ackerman and Elstadt. The justification for this 80,000 unconditional grant, however, is no longer common ownership of the earth, but more comprehensive concept of justice and equality of opportunity. Basic income, utopian socialists Charlier and Mill. Charles Fourier's right to subsistence. What equal ownership of the earth justifies, in Paine's view, is an unconditional endowment for all, not a guaranteed income. A number of 19th century reformers such as Cobbett, Reed, Scrap in England have rather interpreted is to give guaranteed income schemes a firmer basis than public charity. Most famous among them is the eccentric and prolific French writer Charles Fourier, one of the radical visionaries Marx contemptuously labeled a utopian socialist. In The Foss's Industry, Fourier argues that the violation of each person's fundamental national right to hunt, fish, pick fruit, and let her cattle graze on the commons implies that civilization owes subsistence to everyone unable to meet his or her needs in the form of a six-class hotel room and 3 modest meals a day. This is in French. Sorry. Fourier, however, is clear about the non-universality of the delivery of this income kind. Only a minority would be accommodated in those hotels, as he is about the absence of a work test is unconditional entitlement for the poor by way of compensation for the loss of direct access to natural resources. His disciple and leader of the Fourier school makes a step in the direction of a genuine basic income when emphasizing that when work will have been made attractive thanks to the philanthropy system, one will be able to forward a minimum income to the poor members of the community, and with certainty that they will have earned more than expenditure by the end of the year. But despite the nature of the underlying justification, poor relief is still not being turned into universal income. Joseph Charlier's territorial dividend, 1848, however, while Karl Marx was finishing the Communist Manifesto in another neighborhood of Brussels, the Fourierist author Joseph Charlier published in Brussels his solution in French, which can be regarded as containing the first formulation of a genuine basic income. Undoubtedly inspired by the Fourierist tradition, he saw the equal right to ownership of land as the foundation of unconditional right to some income, but he rejected both the right to means-tested assistance advocated by Fourier himself and the right to paid work advocated by his most prominent disciple, Considerant. The former, he reckoned, only dealt with the effects, and the latter involved too much mingling by the state under the labels minimum, later dividend territory. He proposed giving every citizen with an unconditional right to a quarterly, later monthly payment of an amount fixed annually by a representative national council on the basis of the rental value of all real estate. In a later book in which he further develops his proposal, he relabels it, also in French. Such a scheme, he argues, would end the domination of capital over labor. Would it not encourage idleness? Hard luck for the lazy. They will be put on short allowance. Society's duty does not reach beyond securing each a fair share of the enjoyment of what nature puts at his disposal without usurping anyone's rights. Anything above the minimum will have to be earned. Then we have Mill. Mill's most skillfully combined form of socialism. Charlier's obstinate plea was hardly heard, and he himself quickly forgotten. This is not quite what happened to another admirer of Fourier's, of John Stuart Mill. The relevant passage in a sympathetic discussion of Fourierism, which he added to the second editions of Principle of Political Economy, published the year after Charlier's first book. The discussion unambiguously ascribed to the Fourierists the proposal of a non-means-tested basic income, the most skillfully combined and with the greatest foresight of objections of all the forms of socialism is that commonly known as Fourierism. The system does not contemplate the abolition of private property, nor even of inheritance. On the contrary, it avowedly takes into consideration as elements in the distribution of the produce, capital, as well as labor. In the distribution, a certain minimum is first assigned for the subsistence of every member of the community, whether capable or not of labor. The remainder of the produce is shared in a certain proportions to be determined beforehand among the three elements: labor, capital, and talent. The idea is clearly three, and under the pen of one of the most influential political thinkers of the century, but it will take another 6 decades before something like a real discussion arose for the first time. So on to the 20th century. 20th century saw 3 periods when discussion about basic income was particularly intense. Firstly, under the names like social dividend, state bonus, and national dividend, proposals for a genuinely unconditional and universal basic income were developed in interwar debates in England. Secondly, after some years of silence, this type of ideas was rediscovered and gained considerable popularity in debates about demo grants and negative income tax schemes during the 1960s and 70s in the United States. Thirdly, a new period of debate and exploration emerged as basic income proposals were actively discussed in several countries in northwestern Europe. from the late 70s to early 80s. Quite independently, the century also saw the introduction of the world's first full-blown basic income scheme through the birth of the Alaskan Permanent Fund, funding annual dividends to all inhabitants of Alaska. England between the war, from militancy to respectability, Russell's combination of anachronism and socialism. Things start waking up in Britain in 1918, towards the end of the First World War, and Roads to Freedom, a short and incisive book first published in 1980. The mathematician, philosopher, nonconformist political thinker, militant pacifist, and Nobel laureate in literature, Bertrand Russell urges for a social model that combines the advantages of socialism and anarchism, one central component of UBI sufficient for necessities. Anarchism has the advantage as regards liberty, social as regards the inducement to work. Can we not find a method of combining these two advantages? It seems to me that we can. Stated in more familiar terms, the plan we are advocating amounts essentially to this, that a certain small income sufficient for necessities should become secured to all, whether they work or not, and the larger income is much larger as might be warranted by the total amount of commodities produced, should be given to those who are willing to engage in some work which the community recognizes as useful. When education is finished, no one should be compelled to work, and those who choose not to work should receive a bare livelihood and be left completely free. Milner State Bonus. In the same year, the young engineer, Quaker and Labor Party member Dennis Milner publishes jointly with his wife Mabel a short pamphlet entitled Scheme for a State Bonus, 1918. What they argued for, using an electric series of arguments, was the introduction of an income paid unconditionally on a weekly basis to all citizens of the UK, pitched at a 20% of GDP per capita. The state bonus should make it possible to solve the problems of poverty, particularly acute in the aftermath of the war, as everyone has a moral right to means of subsistence. Any obligation to work enforced through the threat of the withdrawal of these means is ruled out. Milner subsequently elaborated the proposal in his book, published by a respectable publisher under the title Higher Production by a Bonus of National Output. Many of the arguments that played a central role in later discussions can be found in this book, from the unemployment trap to labor market flexibility, from low rates to take up the ideal complement of profit sharing. But the emphasis is on the productivist case. The state bonus can even be vindicated on grounds of efficiency alone. Milner's proposal was enthusiastically backed by fellow Quaker Bertrand Pickard, supported by a short-lived state bonus league under whose banner Milner took part in national election, discussed in the 1920 British Labour Party's conference, and definitely rejected the following year. So Major Douglas and the social credit movement. It did not take long, however, for another English engineer, Clifford Major Douglas, to take up the idea again with significantly greater impact. Douglas was struck by how productive British industry had become after World War I and began to wonder about the risk of overproduction. How could a population impoverished by 4 years of war consume the goods available in abundance when banks were reticent to give them credit and their purchasing power was rising only very slowly? To solve this problem, Douglas proposed a series of lectures and writings, often quite confused, the introduction of social credit mechanisms, one of which consisted in paying all households a monthly national dividend. The social credit movement enjoyed varying fortunes. It failed to establish itself in the United Kingdom, but attracted many supporters in Canada, where a social credit party governed the province of Alberta from 1935 to 71, although it rapidly dropped the idea of introducing a national dividend. So Cole and Mead on social dividend. Well, the popularity of the social credit movement was first swelling and next shrinking in broad layers of British populism. The idea of UBI was gaining ground in the small circle of intellectuals close to the British Labour Party. Prominent among them was the economist George Cole, the first holder of Oxford's Shishlet Chair of Social and Political Theory. In several books, he resolutely defended what he was to be called a social dividend. Current productive power is, in effect, a joint result of concurrent effort in the social heritage of inventiveness and skill incorporated in the stage of advancement in education reached in the arts of production. It has always appeared to me only right that all citizens should share in the yields of this common heritage, and that only the balance of the product after this allocation should be distributed in the form of rewards for and incentives to current services in production. The presentation of J.S. Mills in History of Socialist Thought Cole also seemed to have been the first to refer to the idea of UBI by using the English expression basic income, which quickly spread as the discussion became international in the 1980s. Politically less active, but with a far wider international reputation than Cole, another Oxford economist, the Nobel laureate James Mead, defended the social dividend with even greater tenacity. The idea of a social dividend, and it's present in his outline of economic policy for a labor government, 1935, and in several other early writings as a central ingredient of a just and efficient economy. And it was to become a crucial component of the Agathopia project, to which he devoted his last writings, partnership between capital and labor, and a social dividend funded by public assets, and there offered together as a solution to the problems of unemployment and poverty. Around the same time and place as the notion of social dividend appeared in the writings of Mead, it also surfaced in famous discussions on market socialism by two professors of the London School of Economics, Oscar Lange and Abel Lerner. In reply to the remarks by Lerner, Lange made clear the expression social dividend, which he used to refer to the return on collectively owned capital, had to be understood as a contribution independent. It is on the background of this interwar discussion that the liberal Pierre Williams proposed a new social contract whose central element consisted in a basic income, universal but not quite unconditional, as it made availability for work a necessary counterpart for the uniform grant. Payment of the grant is suspended during strikes, for example. However, it was the alternative proposal for a national minimum income tied to a broader program of unified national child benefit and social insurance made in 1942 by another liberal peer, Beveridge, director of the London School of Economics, that prevailed in Britain, and soon started spreading elsewhere in Europe, thus relegating UBI-type proposals to the fringe of UK's policy-relevant debate. Short-lived effervescence, United States in the 60s. Three American approaches to the guaranteed minimum is the turbulent America of the 1960s at the peak of civil rights movement that a real debate on universal basic income resurfaced with three main sources of inspiration. First, Robert Theobald and his ad hoc committee on the Triple Revolution, 1964, defended in various publications a vaguely specified guaranteed minimum income on grounds reminiscent of Douglas, such as the belief that automation is rendering work for prey obsolete, and the government handouts are the only way to give the public the means to buy the immense bounty produced by automations. Secondly, in his popular Capitalism and Freedom, the American economics and Nobel laureate Milton Friedman proposed a radical simplification of the American welfare state through the introduction of what he there called a negative income tax. Friedman's proposal of a linear negative income tax would fully integrate the income tax and transfer system. It was offered as a simple and radical alternative to the patchwork existing social welfare schemes. It itself was meant as a transition stage on the way to an ideal transfer-free capitalist economy. For Friedman's own account, where he got the idea in relevant references on this webpage, you can see Simplicity Friedman. And finally, most importantly, James Tobin, John Kenneth Galbraith, and other liberal economics started defending a series of articles the idea of guaranteed minimum income, more general, more generous, and less dependency, creating the existing assistance program. Tobin's demo grant. Tobin, Peachman, and Miskowski published the first technical analysis of negative income tax schemes in 1967, where they came out in favor of a variant involving an automatic payment to all citizens, a genuine UBI, which Joseph Peachman proposed calling it a demo grant. In contrast with Friedman's proposal, Tobin's demo grant scheme was not meant to replace the whole system of social assistance and insurance scheme, let alone to help extinguish the welfare state altogether, but only to reconfigure its lower components so as to make it more efficient and work-friendlier instrument for raising the incentives of the poor. Under Tobin's proposal, more generous than Friedman's and more precise than Theobald's, each household was to be granted a basic credit at a level varying with family composition, which each family could supplement with earnings and other income taxed at a uniform rate. The Nixon's Family Assistance Program and the McGovern support for the demo grant. In this lively and promising context, a petition was organized in the spring of 1968 calling for the U.S. Congress to adapt this year a system of income guarantees and supplements. It was supported by James Tobin, Samuelson, Galbraith, Lampman, Watts, and over 1,000 more economics, though not by Milton Friedman, in a context which dependence on the existing means-tested welfare system was increasingly dramatically. This petition contributed to creating a climate in which the administration felt it had to move ahead. This led to the Family Assistance Plan, an ambitious social welfare program prepared by the Democratic Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan on behalf of Republican President Nixon's administration. The FAP provided for the abolition of the aid program targeting poor families and incorporated guaranteed income with financial supplements for workers, which came close to a negative income tax scheme. It was publicly presented by President Nixon, August 69, adopted in April 70 by a large majority of the U.S. House of Representatives, rejected by the relevant commission of the U.S. Senate in November 1970, and definitively rejected in 1972, despite several amendments meant to assuage the opposition, owing to a coalition between those who found it too timid and those who found it too bold. A more ambitious Demogrant plan was included on Tobin's advice in Democrat George McGovern's platform in the 1970 presidential elections, but dropped in August, combined with McGovern's defeat by Nixon in 72, the beginning of the Watergate affair in March 73, Nixon's resignation in 74, the defeat of FAP in the Senate marked the end of the short but strong appearance of UBI-type ideas in the U.S. debate. The discussion continued, however, in more academic vein on the basis of 5 large-scale experiments with negative income tax schemes, 4 in the U.S. and 1 in Canada, and controversies over the result. New departure, Northwestern Europe in the 1980s. The first initiative debates in Denmark and the Netherlands. Towards the end of the 1970s, while the Demogrant debate was virtually forgotten in the U.S., a debate on UBI started up from scratch in a number of European countries in near total ignorance of the previous discussions, whether in Europe or in America. Thus, in Denmark, 3 academics defended a UBI proposal by the name of Citizen's Wage in a national bestseller later translated into English under the title A Revolt from the Center. But it is above all in the Netherlands, and the new European discussion of UBI took off. The first voice to be heard in this discussion was J.P. Coupier, a professor of social medicine at the Free University of Amsterdam. Struck by how sick some people were able to make themselves by working too much while others while making themselves sick because they could not find work, he recommended uncoupling employment and income as a way to counter the dehumanizing nature of paid employment. Only a decent guaranteed income, as he called it, would enable people to develop independently and autonomously. In 1977, the small radical party, grown out of the left of the Dutch Christian Democratic Party, became the first European political party with parliamentary representation to officially include a UBI in its electoral program. The movement grew quite rapidly thanks to involvement of the food sector trade union, a component of the main trade union confederation, with its exceptionally high proportion of women and part-time workers among its members. The union played a major role in the Dutch debate throughout the 1980s. It initiated a series of publications and actions defending a UBI combined with a drastic reduction in working time, and hosted a Dutch UBI associations on its premises. In 1985, the Dutch discussion reached the first climax when prestigious Scientific Council for Government Policy created a sensation by publishing a report in which it recommended unambiguously the introduction of a so-called partial basic income. Such a partial basic income is a genuine UBI, but at a level insufficient to cover the needs of a single person, and hence not meant to replace the existing conditional minimum income systems. Developments in Germany and Britain. Around the same time, the debate began to take shape in other countries too, albeit more discreetly. In 1984, a group of academics and activists gathered around Bill Jordan and Parker under the auspices of the National Council of Voluntary Organizations, formed the Basic Income Research Group, BERG, which was to become in 1998 the Citizens Income Trust, despite the consistent support of independent minds such as the assistant editor of the Financial Times, Samuel Britton, and the sympathy shown for the idea by Liberal Democratic Party. The UBI did not manage to reach mainstream politics except the very attenuated form of a baby bond. In Blair's New Labor era, and more than under Thatcher's neoliberalism in Germany. Thomas Schmidt, an eco-libertarian from Berlin, got the discussion going with his Liberation from False Labor, several collective volumes emanating from the Green Movement pursued and developed this first initiative. At the same time, a professor of public finance at the University of Frankfurt began a long campaign in favor of a citizen's income administered in the form of a negative income tax. However, the fall of the Berlin Wall and the consequent reunification of Germany stopped this incipient public discussion for many years, despite the support it joined from reputed academics like Klaus Affe, close to the Greens, and to a lesser extent by Fritz Scharf, close to the Social Democrats. It is only around 2005, after reunification was more or less digested, that a surprising convergence then generated a rich national debate. So in France, the debate got off the ground more slowly. The influential left-wing socialist and philosopher Gors initially defended a lifelong basic income coupled to a universal social service of 20,000 hours. However, his fears of social life getting entirely colonized by paid employment drove him towards the defense of an unconditional income. In a very different vein, Bresson, self-described as a left Gaullist economics, offered a convoluted argument for a universal existence income supposed to be pitched at a level objectively determined by the value of time. Kelly, leader of the movement against utilitarianism in the social sciences, advocated for unconditional income as the expression of society's fundamental trust in those excluded from the labor market and their ability and willingness to invest in the activities of collective interest. And Jean-Marc Ferry, a political philosopher in the Habermas tradition, developed a plea for a UBI and a right of citizenship at the level of the European Union, in a context in which he reckons full employment, conventionally understood, is forever out of reach, and in which a quaternary sector of socially useful activities needs to be developed. Picture from the meeting in Belgium, 1986 convention. The birth and expansion of BN, where we're reading from currently. These modest national debates emerged independently from one another, and intellectual contributions that fed them were unaware of most of the history of the idea, if not the whole of it. However, they gradually came into contact with one another thanks to the creation of Vienne in 1984. A group of researchers and trade unionists close to the University of Leuven, Belgium, published a provocative UBI scenario under the collection pseudonym Collective Charles Fourier. The scenario was entered into a competition on the future of work, earning the collective a prize with which it organized a Louvain in Belgium in 1986. At the first meeting, gathered UBI supporters from several countries, pleasantly surprised to discover how many people were interested in an idea they thought they were almost alone in defending. The participants decided to set up the Basic Income European Network, which published a regular newsletter and organized conferences over 2 years. The birth of similar networks in the United States, South America, and South Africa. The intensification of contacts with pre-existing networks in Australia and New Zealand, and the presence of an increasing number of non-Europeans in the BN conferences, led BN to reinterpret its acronym as the Basic Income Earth Network at its 10th Congress held in Barcelona in September 2004. The first Congress outside Europe of the newly celebrated worldwide network was held at the University of Cape Town, South Africa in 2006. Now let's look at Alaska. The introduction and development of the only genuine universal basic income system in existence to this day took place many leagues from these debates in the mid-1970s. Jay Hammond, the Republican governor of the state of Alaska in the United States, was concerned that the huge wealth generated by oil mining in the Proud Hope Bay, the largest oil field in North America, would only benefit the current population of the state. He suggested setting up a fund to ensure that the wealth would be preserved through investment. A part of the revenue of the oil in 1976, the Alaska Permanent Fund was created by amendment to the state constitution in order to get the Alaska population interested in its growth and continuity. Governor Hammond conceived of the annual payment of a dividend to all residents in proportion to the number of years of residence. Brought before the United States Supreme Court on grounds of discrimination against immigrants from other states, the proposal was declared in contradiction with the Equal Protection Clause, the 14th Amendment to the federal Constitution. The proposal was modified in order to overcome this objection and transformed into a genuine universal basic income since implementation of the program in 1982. Everyone who has been officially resident in Alaska for at least 6 months, concurrently around 650,000 people, has received a uniform dividend every year, whatever their age and number of years of residence in the state. This dividend corresponds to part of the average interest earned over the previous 5 years on the permanent fund set up using the revenue from oil mining. This fund was initially invested exclusively in the state economy, but later became an international portfolio, thus enabling the distribution of the dividend to cushion the fluctuations in the local economic situation instead of amplifying them. The dividend stood at around $300 per person per annum in the early years, but was close to reaching $2,000 in 2000 when the stock market plummeted and cut the dividend in half in the course of a few years. In 2008, however, the size of the annual dividends reached a new all-time high with a payment of $2,069 per person. Alaska's oil dividend scheme has repeatedly been proposed for other parts of the world, but still remains unique and helps make Alaska the most egalitarian among U.S. states. So that was a great history from BN that I encourage people to look through their whole webpage. I'll put in the chat one more time, and there's a lot of good information there that this has been going over for 30 years now. So let me exit screen share briefly, get to rest my voice. I'm not sure if anyone in the chat wants to join or has something to say or add for a few minutes while I rest my voice. Otherwise, I'm just going to have to, unfortunately, have a tiny bit of dead air time while I rest my voice. Look through the chat. Appreciate people being chat. Got Lucid here again. Acorn, glad you're here. I'm not sure if Brundle's going to be joining me, maybe about noon in 20, 30 minutes. Okay, so let me re-enter screen share. I'll keep going. There's a lot of information here. I read that one completely out because I thought that historical backdrop was extremely important, and I wanted people to be able to see the long history of this. So we're going to look at some of the economics, but saying everyone's going to pay for it, the collective economy, and kind of like a tax on everyone. So you saw the long history going back over 500 years that I read the whole thing out. I think I'm gonna read this whole one out too, because it's important to get the idea, and for all those listening. And I got more PowerPoints, so let's look at the International Scholar. Automation, Universal Basic Income, and the Future of Work. This one's much shorter than the last one. All across developed economies, we are witnessing the dawn of another industrial revolution. The age of automation is upon us. It has the potential to bring a great deal more productivity and remove many menial jobs for a sufficient portion of the population. There's just one problem in our present system. Hundreds of thousands of people in our economy itself depend on those jobs. For many, the age of automation will abolish their jobs, and it's not likely that the new age of industrialization will bring them new ones. What does the future of work look like in a world without these jobs? The fourth industrial revolution, automation and artificial intelligence. In the last three industrial revolutions, breakthroughs in technology and labor organization produced massive gains in productivity and output. In the process, they created millions of new jobs while simultaneously making other jobs obsolete. So if this is merely another cycle of industrialization, what difference? This time, won't old jobs give way to newer and better jobs in artificial intelligence, computer science, and engineering? Well, automation will certainly create many new jobs in the field of computer science, engineering, and cybersecurity. The number of new jobs created won't necessarily offset the number of jobs lost to automation and artificial intelligence. An excellent example of this unequal offset is Netflix. Today, it takes a team of a few hundred or a few thousand employees to run a company like Netflix. In 2004, Netflix ancestor company Blockbuster employed around 84,000 people and was worth $5 billion. Blockbuster and its traditional peer companies have become obsolete following the advent of online streaming services like Netflix and Hulu. In 2017, Netflix employed around 5.5 thousand people and was worth $70 billion. Netflix can employ so few people and make so much more relative to Blockbuster because it makes excellent use of software engineering, the universality of the internet, and the automation of simple and repetitive tasks. Netflix is only one small example, according to the 2013 study of University of Oxford that I put in the chat earlier. An estimated 47% of U.S. jobs could be at risk of computerization over the next 20 years. Today, that figure has been revised upwards to 85%. Already, automation and AI have replaced most accounting jobs, yet a large number of people working jobs that can be automated are still waking up and going to work on Mondays. However, as it is true with so much of our technology-driven world, that could change almost overnight. The most widely cited innovation in automation primed for release is the driverless vehicle. According to the American Trucking Association, there are around 3.5 million truck drivers in the United States. Add on to that approximately 300,000 taxi drivers and the several million part-time Uber and Lyft drivers in the gig economy in the United States, and you could quickly see the massive impact widespread use of driverless vehicles on the economy. So what jobs will be created to replace those displacement by automation? Principally jobs in software engineering, learn to code, mechanical engineering, cybersecurity, and customer support are likely to be created by the introduction of the driverless car. It is highly implausible that there will be several million new jobs in these sectors to replace the old jobs. To design the software, mechanics, manage cybersecurity systems, and provide customer support for massive fleets of driverless cars will not create new jobs in the millions, but more likely in the thousands. The advent of the driverless vehicle would leave a significant proportion of the U.S. population out of work almost immediately, to say nothing of the barriers to entry for former drivers to take up work as engineers and computer scientists. And yet this is but one industry of many that will undoubtedly be affected by automation at a time when the United States, China, France, and Germany are spending billions of dollars on developing artificial intelligence and creating industrial hubs for computer science. It is essential to ask ourselves, how will this change the way we work? Future work and universal basic income. If automation and artificial intelligence are going to remove something on the order of 50% of industrialized countries' jobs without creating an equal number of jobs to replace them, what will those people do and how will they earn a living? According to the data collected at the U.S. Census Bureau in 2016, 40.6 million Americans already live in poverty, 12.7% of us. Without any income, how will the more than 80 million Americans at risk of losing their jobs cope? Our economy is based on consumption, supply and demand. We demand and consume products which are produced by companies that provide for the income of employees who consume and repeat the process. The structure is already under stress from rising income inequality and secular stagnations. The loss of even a fifth of U.S. jobs and therefore consumers would deal a crippling blow to our economy. The problem is threefold. How do we as a society provide for those who have lost their jobs? How can we sustain our economy without the employed consumer base we have today? How can we provide meaning without work? Let's examine the last question for a moment. In the world we live in today, people work for a living. An individual provides their labor to the market to earn a living wage, which allows them to consume products that they need and want. In turn, this enables them to take part in society. Not only does it provide them an income, but their work also helps them find their place in society and in relationship to others. For many people, work provides a sense of purpose and meaning. Assuming one could survive without a job, what would it mean to have our time back? What would we do without a job, and what would bring us meaning? An excellent 2017 episode, Foreign Policies, the Editors Roundtable, David Rothkopf, poses the question in a different light. Could you possibly get your dignity from painting a picture, writing a poem, exploring your spiritual life, or being with your family? Quite correctly, Rothkopf postulates that our economic model in the 21st century will necessarily look a great deal different from the 20th century. If we are to face the issues surrounding the loss of jobs to automation and artificial intelligence, we must adapt our economic model accordingly. Perhaps one of the most innovative solutions to the challenge of automation and income inequality is the concept of universal basic income, UBI. In a nutshell, UBI is provided by a government to all citizens, regardless of their employment status, tax-free. While there are many different arguments about what a UBI should provide, the most economically sound and feasible form a UBI could take would be a minimal basic income, just enough to keep people above the poverty line. The most common fears about providing a UBI are that it would incentivize people not to work, it would cause inflation, it wouldn't be economically feasible. Let's address those points one at a time. Providing a universal basic income would incentivize people not to work. This is a common misconception. Note the links in this article that go to articles more in depth on this. So providing universal income would incentivize people not to work. This is a common misconception. It is easy to understand innately. Most people regard others as lazy. We often grumble about having to work. So it makes sense that if you did not have to work to survive, you wouldn't. However, ask yourself, would you be satisfied with a standard of living just above the poverty line? Experimental studies in most countries, including Canada, Sweden, Finland, have turned up different results. Rather than giving up work, providing a minimum basic income help relieve some of the economic pressures people felt and allowed them time to find the right job. In experiments in Canada, only 1% of people quit their job primarily to care for children. For the other 99%, they use the extra money to go back to school, find a better job, or to reduce the number of hours they put in to avoid overworking themselves. Providing a universal basic income would cause inflation. Inflation is caused by the sudden introduction of a large quantity of new money into the economy. Typically, this is caused when the government purchasing bonds or printing new money, or excessive consumption causes the economy to overheat. However, because the funds for the UBI would be taken out of taxes or other expenses, the money wouldn't be generated out of thin air, but rather redistributed. This means that instead of causing inflation, the introduction of UBI would more likely lead to a rise in consumption, which would create economic growth. Providing universal basic income wouldn't be economically feasible. It is understandable that fears of creating handouts would cause some trepidation, especially in the United States. The welfare programs across the Western world are costly and often the subject of considerable criticisms and debate. The simplest way to make UBI economically feasible would be to eliminate all other government welfare programs and replace it with a single UBI. Doing so would free up vast amounts of money that are poorly spent and subject to an enormously bureaucracy, which would also in turn disappear and provide more funding. United States providing minimum basic income would mean providing $1,000 a month to every citizen. If every American over the age of 18 received a UBI equivalent of $12,000 per year in the United States, that would be equivalent to roughly $232 billion per annum, or 0.00001 of GDP, according to the Federal Reserve's economic database. In 2016, the U.S. spent roughly $141.6 billion in welfare and social services. Restructuring the budget slightly to accommodate the difference by redirecting money from other expenditures would be relatively straightforward. Okay, so if minimum basic income is feasible, what makes it better than the welfare system we already have in place? In other words, why create a minimum basic income instead of extending welfare to those who have lost their jobs? Start with what welfare programs are incredibly complex. They require massive amounts of documentation and paperwork on the side of the beneficiary citizen, require that a citizen applies to a certain number of jobs per month, and sometimes require that the recipient take the first job offered to them, regardless of the quality of the job or if it is a good fit. Furthermore, the moment you are employed, you lose your welfare and your income is taxable. Assuming you receive $1,000 in welfare and social services per month and then take a job with a $1,200 per month, you would likely take home less than your previous welfare after taxes and other expenses. In other words, welfare programs tend to promote passive behavior and leave people trapped in low-income jobs. A UBI of $1,000 would be tax-free and unconditional, allowing you to use your time to find the right job for you. Even better, you don't lose your UBI once you get a job, but your new income gets added to what you already gained from your UBI. In other words, a UBI would promote active behavior. You stand only to gain from seeking to improve your income by taking a job. In a consumer-based economy facing the loss of hundreds of thousands of jobs and stricken by income inequality, introducing a universal basic income could significantly improve the standards of living for millions of people. The effects on the U.S. economy could be just as positive. For every $1 that working class Americans make, their consumption adds to 1.21 to the economy by generating a demand for the product that creates the jobs, investments, and so on. For wealthy Americans, the figure is closer to $0.39 for every extra dollar. In simple terms, imagine handing an average working class American and a high-income American each $1,000. The working class American is likely to spend most of the $1,000 creating more demand for products and allowing him or her to purchase the goods and services that he or she needs. The wealthy American already has the money that he or she needs to survive, and so spends less of it, generating less value for the economy for each dollar that he or she receives. In economic terms, we call this the marginal propensity to consume. By making it possible for working class Americans to consume more, we might not only reduce income inequality, but significantly grow the economy. A study by Roosevelt Institute predicts the impact of the introduction of $1,000 per month UBA on the U.S. economy would be an additional 12% growth in the overall GDP over a span of 8 years. So conclusions, given the fast-paced economic change in the United States and other developed economies, the advent of globalization, significant rise in income inequality, secular stagnation, the prospect of the loss of millions of jobs to automation and AI in the future, it's time to start thinking seriously about the future of work. Thankfully, there are many think tanks and policy institutes analyzing ways to adapt the 21st century economy. While there's no silver bullet to solve all these problems with one policy, there are a few ways we can begin to address them in order to provide work for the future mass of people who have lost their jobs to automation and artificial intelligence. Government should offer large-scale programs to help people find and train for new jobs. Developing a minimum basic income to complement this program would not only allow citizens to afford the time to retrain themselves, but would also allow people to continue to consume and therefore contribute to economic growth. In the meantime, societies and governments must also begin to reflect on the relationship between capital and taxation. While people are taxed, the machines and programs that will replace them will not be. What should be the societal cost of operating a business worth billions of dollars and employs only a handful of people be? What should we do with that money, and how should people who have been permanently removed from the labor force by technological advancements spend their time and contribute to society? These are huge questions of philosophical as much as economic repercussions and have no clear answers. It is up to us to answer them and decide how the future of work should look. Okay, so at this point, I think anyone who's been watching has seen a substantial amount of detailed information about universal basic income, the history, the philosophical backdrop, a little automation. I'm going to submit a few reading material that I'm not going to have time to read through, but people who want to know more about it, these are long. I've skimmed through them. This one's over 60 pages. Will the internet, robotics, and artificial intelligence mean a jobless future? A recent narrative says tomorrow technology will fundamentally differ from cotton mills, steam engines, and washing machines. Automation will be less like post-World War II demobilization for soldiers and more like cars for horses. Driverless vehicles will oust truckers and taxi drivers. Hyper-intelligent clouds will oust financial advisors, doctors, and journalists. We face more natural technological unemployment than ever. Government has said must enact a basic income because so many jobs will vanish. Also, maybe robots should become electronic persons, the subject of rights and duties, so they can be taxed. The narrative is endorsed by prominent tech billionaires, but is flawed. Everything depends on social policy instead of mass unemployment and a basic income. The law can achieve full employment and fair incomes. This article explains 3 views of the causes of unemployment as natural and stemming from irrationality or technology, or is caused by the laws that let people restrict the supply of capital to the job market. Only the third view has credible evidence and support. After World War II, 40% of UK jobs were redundant, but social policy maintained full employment, and it can be done again. Unemployment is driven by inequality of wealth and of votes in the economy. Democratic governments should reprogram the law for full employment and universal fair incomes. The owners of the robots will not automate your job away if we redefine economic democracy. Let me read a little bit of this. Let's see if Brundle's going to pop on, or it's just going to be me reading. Tomorrow's technology will let us make paradise on Earth, where scarcity and poverty will be forgotten, yet we remain consumed by visions of dystopia as inequality has become more extreme. A busload of billionaires own more wealth than half the planet, and many of them are saying new technology that they aim to own will mean mass unemployment. The solution they propose is basic income. Facebook owners Mark Zuckerberg said technology automation are eliminating many jobs, and we should explore ideas like universal basic income to give everyone a cushion to try new things. Tesla's owner Elon Musk said 20 years is a short period of time to have something like 12 to 15% of the workforce be unemployed, and a basic income is going to be necessary because there will be fewer and fewer jobs that a robot cannot do better. The foundation of eBay's Pierre Obermeyer says automation is replacing traditional jobs, and the gig economy may make employment far less stable and reliable for supporting a livelihood. Advocates of this narrative respond sharply to criticism. A contributor to the Washington Post owned by Amazon's billionaire Jeff Bezos wrote, "Sorry, but the jobless future isn't a Luddite fallacy." There is intellectual support in economics and sociology for the narrative. A basic income enjoys cross-ideological support from Milton Friedman to Guy Standing. Basic income can be seen as a way to decrease welfare cost or social stigma. Something it could eliminate the collective welfare state, others that it completes the welfare state. But once the shape of the basic income plan is agreed, we must ask if automation is the right reason for it. In 2013, Frey and Osborne dramatically stated 47% of total U.S. employment is potentially at risk from automation over some unspecified number of years. They developed this argument with Citibank Research. Another paper in 2017, partly funded by a Facebook billionaire, says robots will replace most human functions and write a best-selling book by 2049. Like Fran Osborne, its method was surveying 352 AI experts. These figures have reached viral proportions in social media, academia, without citation mounting as of likes or retweets. The problem is predictions of the future over some unspecified number of years are unfalsifiable, like saying there is an end of history or skateboards might fly. This technological forecasting has all the shiny appeal, but also the intellectual integrity of a crystal ball. This article explores how legal policy can create full employment and fair incomes, not just mass unemployment and basic income. Part 2 discusses 3 main views of the causes of unemployment. One says unemployment is natural and full employment will accelerate inflation. The second says human irrationality drives unemployment, and if not technology, may. A third view, less discussed outside times of crisis, says unemployment is a policy choice. Law can prevent or enable restrictions on the supply of capital to the job market. The laws of contracts, property, corporations, labor, and more determines employment. Law can guarantee full employment and advance social welfare for everyone. In its simplest dimension, as the owners of Animal Farm eventually knew, technology will mean social prosperity if the gains are not trotted away by a few. We cannot know the future, but we can learn from the past. Part 3 explores 5 periods of history where technology was changing fast. First, enclosures for sheep and the textile industry drove Luddite and swing riots in Britain. If people are excluded from technology's benefits paid for by their labor, they revolt. Second, after World War II, demobilization in the UK meant 42% of all workers from armies to munition factories moved to civilian production. The change was immediate, huge, and far more complex than automation. Chaos in World War I encouraged careful thought in World War II for full employment in a free society. Third, mass-produced motors did mean mass redundancies of horses. In the U.S., a staggering 88% of horses lost their jobs over 45 years. But human beings will not share the fate of horses. Horses do not write law, people do. Fourth, the humble washing machine was a revolutionary technology, saving labor, improving gender equality. If people internalize the gains of automation, human development advances rapidly. Fifth, while artificial intelligence is remarkable, the evidence suggests computers will not develop cognitive functions. While the basis of a computer's intelligence is zeros and ones, Cartesian self-awareness seems far away, and most teachers know rote learning is not critical thinking, data is not knowledge, doing is not understanding. Until science fiction becomes fact and AI hype moves beyond clickbait, technology's value will remain what it always has been, a way both to empower and accentuate the uniqueness of the human mind. History is clear that change can mean redundancy. So part 4 asks, does the law enable everyone to share fairly in technology's gains? The answer is not yet. We can and should reprogram the law. First, full employment must be guaranteed by law, while regional investment and training must advance. The votes in the economy must be distributed fairly to prevent artificial restriction on the supply of capital to the job market. Regular investment, regardless of conflicting interests of private or public actors, must be maintained by funds where contributors have a vote. Second, Social Security must be universal. A universal basic income is a powerful idea, but it must not, like the disastrous speak and lend system of the 19th century, subsidize poverty pay employers. Third, people who benefit from robot ownership must bear all the risks of their enterprise. Robots are products, not persons. The notion of electronic personality could frustrate stricter enterprise liability. To advance universal fair incomes, assets owners must pay their fair share of tax. Taxing the robots is fine as a metaphor for taxing robot owners alongside all corporate profits. Part 5 concludes robots will not automate your jobs if we defend economic democracy. Okay, so I encourage people to read through this whole paper. Okay, we got J.M. Rishitelli in the chat, wants to speak to me offline. So there's more straight economic data that's very valuable. Hopefully, people are more into that. Will read it. I have a lot more presentation here, so I'm just going to keep on going. Here we're talking about basic income, labor, automation, and migration, a report from the Republican perspective. For a lot of people who might be watching are concerned about immigration and migration caused by this, a common concern in alt-right circles, about we're going to look at the universal nature also of basic income, that it really has to be global, but it might be different in different areas and affect migration. The research uses a normative approach to examine the relationship between basic income and migration, the decisive variable in the effect of labor automation, which increases economic insecurities globally, leaving some nation states in a position to cope with this and others not. The insecurities will increase migratory pressures on one hand, but also justify the introduction of basic income on a national state level on the other. The normative guidance is the Republican conception of freedom as non-domination. This is used to justify basic income, analyze how labor automation creates dominating structures and how borders dominate migrants seeking to move to countries which introduce a basic income. The result is the nation states that introduce a basic income to counter internal domination through labor automation also have to look outside of their nation state. The imposition of borders in order to keep a basic income sustainable, as well as labor automation itself, establish a form of domination over less developed countries and thus demand international regulation. This is from the Global Governance Institute. And I'll try to read a little introduction and I'll skip to page 14. Labor automation is growing to threaten jobs worldwide. The advancements in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and robotics increasingly enable machines to execute complex tasks and be more flexible in doing so. Moreover, prices of these technologies are falling. This increases productivity of industries, but puts jobs of millions of workers at risk around the world, as their task will be replaced by machines. Best-selling publications have taken on discussing labor automation's effect on employment. Universal basic income, defined as a periodic cash payment unconditionally delivered to all on a individual basis without means test or work equivalent, has been discussed in the public debate as a way to counter the increasing threat of labor automation on economic security. This research will argue the debate neglects the global scope of labor automation as it occurs in developed as well as developing countries. If jobs are significantly reduced and some states cannot react properly, as with the implementation of basic income, people might want to migrate to those that do react. This raises questions of how to deal with the tensions created between a freedom-enhancing BI and the potential increase of borders in order to keep BI sustainable within a country. This paper aims to contribute to the literature on basic income and migration by analyzing the effects of labor automation. This has not been done within scholarship and is argued here will have substantial impacts on countries. In order to do this research, as is structured as follows. Firstly, the chosen methodology will be discussed. Next, the issues related to the labor automation will be debated, explaining why introducing BI would be a justified reaction. The latter will then be defined, and its philosophical premises will shortly be discussed to establish support for the neo-Republican position on BI. Subsequently, it will be established why it is most likely that the BI will be implemented at the national instead of the supranational level. Then labor automation will be discussed regarding the different effects in developing and developed countries and its potential to increase migratory pressures in former as well as reinforce unequal power structures between the two. Migration pressures arise as developing countries are rather unlikely to introduce basic income. Thus, basic income introduced in countries become a viable alternative to move to. By consulting the academic literature on BI and migration, it becomes apparent that scholars advance border restrictions as a way to make BI sustainable. This poses a dilemma as on one hand, freedom is enhanced through BI and on the other, reduced through border restrictions. This will be elucidated by using normative literature on migration. Hereby, Germany, which is expected to be highly affected by labor automation in future years, will be used as a hypothetical example to illustrate how a developed country can deal with these issues. So I encourage people to read through the whole thing. So justification for basic income on the national level. The debate is not about what is normally the best level to introduce BI, but rather stresses BI having not been implemented anywhere in full scale demands certain institutional settings to start with. The global level. Several ideas exist to endorse a global BI, and I'm going to look at those soon. It could, for example, be funded through a global resource dividend or other taxes imposed on international active corporations. However, from a policy perspective, a globally distributed BI appears to be rather unrealistic as global governance solutions will be too limited and shallow to be sustainable. This is because they attempt to levy welfare policies on a global level will require international income redistribution, which demands the existence of a legitimate authority to collect global taxes, resource income, and redistribute these as BI. This would be a highly complex process in which many different nations, cultures, levels of prosperity, and interests would be involved. An additional issue is the implementation of BI would be linked to the fact that by definition, it has been to be given directly to individuals in authoritarian countries, ensuring that these payments would reach the individuals or reducing the intermediaries that could interfere with a straight transfer from the global to the individual level could be a major difficulty. The regional level, a member of the EU has brought up a BI on a European level in order to be prepared for the technological changes to come. Rising poverty and extreme inequality within the EU would make BI a fitting policy tool to create a socially more equal Europe. BI would come handy as other means of inequality reduction within the EU are not present, such as common fiscal unit or redistribution mechanism. A possible way to implement BI within the EU would be to introduce a euro dividend. The most appropriate way to finance a euro dividend would be through a combination of an EU-wide VAT tax and a modest EU-level energy taxation. Yet, even though the EU is a highly advanced government body above the nation state, it appears to be incapable of implementing a basic income. The heterogeneity of populations' identities that create a lack of solidarity among EU citizens, the plurality of public opinions within the EU, and a weaker set of political institutions compared to the nation state are factors that would hinder BI implementation. The euro crisis demonstrated the existing political cleavages between the creditor and debtor countries that are also reflected in the EU politics in general and threaten the project of European integration. Moreover, Brexit appears to be another setback for this project. The way the migration crisis was discussed in the EU also demonstrated the different positions as well as public opinions among the EU countries. Together with the economic crisis, it gave rise to populist anti-EU right-wing parties. BI on a European level thus appears to be politically unacceptable due to the current solidarity problems among the EU member states. I hope some of you are reading this along with me. Subnational level. On a subnational level, BI schemes have been advanced and are in place as the Alaskan Permanent Fund Dividend and many other mostly local pilot projects show. However, the latter are experiments to gather data in order to examine the real-life effects of BI proxy schemes. Thus, they do not qualify as real BI projects. The Alaskan Permanent Fund Development or Resource Fund Defense Scheme does not provide payments high enough to guarantee subsistence. Therefore, it also does not qualify as proper BI. If the payment would have a substantial level, internal migration could also occur, thus creating political as well as economic issues in the region. It is hard to justify why within a country, people in one region should receive BI and others not. On the national level, the nation state, even though having lost much power and sovereignty in contemporary times to supranational institutions, appear to be the best starting point for the introduction of BI. Finland recently introduced unconditional monthly payments of $560 each month for 2 years to 2,000 long-term unemployed in order to study what effects this will have on their lifestyle. Even though having been introduced by the state, the payments only partially resemble BI due to their focus on unemployment, making them neither unconditional nor universal. The initiative, however, shows that governments are capable of introducing and considering measures similar to BI. The lost Swiss referendum about the introduction of BI was the closest a country ever got to implementing a substantive BI. The comparative advantage of a tax finance welfare state is that they provide opportunities for future, possibly more radical reforms, like the introduction of a basic income. This means that on the national level, welfare regimes that are built on specific ideas of the respective country's capitalist system and institutions already exist. Thus, it is most likely that BI would be established through an ongoing transformation of these systems and shift within the taxation structure rather than through instant change. In order to implement BI, there is a need for democratic legitimization and a monopoly over raising and distributing taxes. These are major strengths of the nation state that multi-governance arrangements like the EU and other supranational regimes do not have, as they are financed through taxes raised by nation states and do not enable direct democratic participation. Nation states may be better suited for the implementation of BI. Furthermore, democratic participation is intrinsically valuable, and nation states have been more successfully providing this than supranational bodies like the EU or UN. However, if implemented on national level, BI is not unconditional anymore, but dependent on membership of a nation state. As standing elucidates an ideal world in some utopian future, you might happily say that everyone, wherever they might be, should have the right to a basic income, but for the present, our eyes must be focused on the state, in particular the nation, the country where social policy is still crafted and implemented. However, BI on a national level does not necessarily mean the country does not have obligations to the outside world. Rather, a nation-state focus might just be a more realistic notion that should be accompanied by attempts to address problems of the domination of the global scale, as will be established in the next section. This can be said about the Republican perception of non-domination on an international level. The labor automation and cause for migratory pressures. The contemporary understanding of freedom of non-domination can be extended into the international sphere to question whether domination occurs between states on different national actors, resembles Skinner's notion. It is possible to live and act as a free man if and only if you live in a free state, pointing towards the possibility that domination can occur outside of political communities, especially economic interdependencies lead to possible dominating situations in which states are dominated by external actors, therefore unable to respond to the will of their political community. Domination in the international sphere is connected to global inequality, poverty, and lack of effective and accountable institutional regulation at a global level. These connections have grown through structural shortcomings based on unequal distribution of power and resources that are also ingrained into international law and institutions. Also, the non-existence of regulation in the international sphere leads to domination. An example, therefore, would be the lack of an international migration regime, leading to states dominating potential migrants by unilaterally imposing borders. Table 1 shows the risk of automation is not just high in developed, but also in developing countries. 2/3 of all jobs in the developing world are susceptible to being automated. It is predicted that in developing countries, the automation of labor will occur at a slower pace than in the developed world. This may be because wages are lower, thus making it at first not attractive for corporations to replace cheap labor with expensive robots. However, this argument is only of short endurance, as robots' prices are falling steeply, whilst the technology is improving quickly. Special case for a developing country is that automation accelerates premature deindustrialization, meaning they would experience a quicker transformation from industrial economy to service economies than developed countries have. This will reduce jobs in industrial sectors that were essential in order to create middle classes in developed countries. Furthermore, the jobs will be left to lower paid service jobs, thus increasing the inequalities in those countries. Additionally, as job polarization also occurs heavily in developing countries, the smaller middle classes might be threatened, and policies to protect people from the negative impact of labor automation should be demanded. However, developing countries lack organized labor structure as well as middle class that is very often responsible for a demanding social security system. Thus, BI as a policy alternative appears to be rather unlikely. As Desai states, the demand for comprehensive welfare program in middle-class countries remains weak. Consequently, it can be expected that it would have even more unlikely to be an option in least developed countries around the world. This corroborated by developing middle-income countries have only lately been established social security systems and institutions to support poorest members of their societies. According to the International Labor Organization, 70% of the global population do not enjoy proper social security, resulting in high economic insecurity and structural poverty. This is especially the case in developing countries where a low percentage of labor force receive unemployment benefits compared to 80% of the labor force in Europe. Therefore, developed countries appear to be in a position of power as they have more capacities to counter the consequences of labor automation and at the same time are also highly involved in automating labor. Automation will make it easier and cheaper for companies to manufacture goods close to where they consume. Developing countries that see a large share of existing jobs at risk of being automated could relocate outsourced facilities in order to create short-term employment possibilities at home, but will also replace outsourced labor by automation. Both of these situations will hurt low-wage countries where a lot of jobs in factories have been set up in recent decades by corporations from developed countries. This exemplifies the power position that corporations have through labor automation in countries where they employ many people. In general, developing countries also lack well-endorsed labor laws, making it easier for corporations to dominate labor conditions. Moreover, developing countries will not enforce tough labor laws as they fear the threat of capital flight. Labor automation then adds more power to corporations, but also depicts the structural weaknesses in international labor law. So globalization has involved an increase in the potential for domination, which increasingly connectedness as asymmetry of power and dependence across borders. What is noteworthy about labor automating technology is that it produced and advanced majorly by societies that see their labor forces shrinking as a consequence of aging population and decreasing birth rates. Pritchett criticizes these technological advancements as abundant labor forces exist in developing countries, arguing that instead of developing labor automating technologies, borders should be open to reduce international inequalities. However, it appears that labor automation is also affecting countries where labor is abundant, thus reducing wages and creating subsistence problems, which in turn cause migratory pressures. This point to a profound problem as the dominating effects of labor automating technology on one side justify a BI on the national level in developed countries, but on the other side create migratory pressures in developing countries, which might interfere with the economic sustainability of a BI project in a developed country. Thus, BI enhances and equally distributes freedom as non-domination within a national society, but on the global level, freedom and non-domination might decrease as people outside the nation might be dominated by borders imposed in order to guarantee the increased freedom within the BI implementing nation state. International domination may be countered by the installation of institutions that equally distribute freedom as non-domination across the international system through democratic regulation. This is because people in a globalized world are often dependent on other states' decisions, especially potential migrants appear to be vulnerable to domination when there is some kind of dependency relation within the countries that impose borders on them. These demands will be further elucidated in the normative discussion that follows in the next chapter. So, okay. This is very important to these recent discussions, so I'm just going to keep on reading. Basic income and migration. The debate about BI and migration has been rather limited, arguing normatively and others debating whether BI would be a welfare magnet in cases of its introduction. In the neoclassical scholarly conception of economic migration, above average wages and employment opportunities would be the main reason to migrate rather than the destination country's welfare system. However, challenge the rationality of the migration choice. They compare the neoclassical model of migration with sociological theory and survey data to see whether BI as a generous welfare provision will increase migration. They come to the conclusion that individuals migrate either to reconnect with family or because of the new job and not necessarily to maximize welfare benefits, thus implying that BI might not increase migration. However, the insights do not take into account the tension induced by labor automation, as the latter reduces jobs but not the labor force available, giving justification to argue that migration might not anymore be based on jobs but rather on welfare of BI in order to subsist. Another study argues that it's not the introduction of BI but the inequalities within the world that create migration, thus rejecting the idea that people would move predominantly in order to receive BI. According to him, the argument is used to shy away from addressing global economic inequalities. However, he also does not consider whether a global phenomenon like labor automation would make those countries that counter it by introducing a BI especially attractive destinations. To counter inequalities around the world and reduce migration, a global BI is advanced as the best ethical solution. However, they acknowledge that it would restrict state sovereignty, hence making it hard to implement in the first place. This exemplifies the tension described above, as it would be best to implement it on such a level, but is highly unlikely to happen. Thus, the focus should be put on what scholars say, focusing on the nation state introducing BI. Another study looking at the connection between migration and sustainability of BI comes to the conclusion that public opinion is very important, as there is a close connection between welfare states and people's contribution to them. Hence, increasing welfare migration could reduce the public support for BI, as the public assumes that migrants will live off states' provisions of social benefits. So into this, that for maintaining political as well as economic sustainability, a highly restrictive border regime is needed to create public support for BI. Argued that the sustainability of genuine domestic redistribution imposes firm limits on hospitality. Thus, the true for conditional minimum income schemes, and at least as true for unconditional basic income, especially politically due to the lack of solidarity between multicultural or heterogeneous societies, is hard to create BI heavily based on redistribution. Thus, is firstly because people are less likely to show solidarity with non-nationals, and secondary because the institutions that create solidarity, like work, are weakened. The only option is to exclude people from a community by increasing border restrictions, as long as the national level is the highest one at which general redistribution can be institutionalized. It needs protection against selective immigration. However, warns that BI is tied to restrictive regulation or citizenship, then this might increase welfare chauvinism. Right-wing parties could instrumentalize the idea of BI and use it to restrict immigration. Another study advances that it would be justified for migrants to be excluded from payments as long as they are not otherwise isolated from society. Shares the opinion that he does not really reject that a surge in migration could occur. He argues that it would be acceptable to include a waiting period or a permanent residence requirement in order to enhance support by citizens. This is renounced by the other study, as they reject weaker solutions than restricting borders. It is a created two-tier society in which BI receiving part of the population could reject jobs that the non-BI receiving part could not. This provides a clear potential for domination. The Republican understanding as part of society could arbitrarily interfere with the more vulnerable. In a similar vein, Howard would see border restrictions as legitimate only if they would ensure the protection of an adequate BI for the least advantage in the nation state. This would have to be combined with a redistributive mechanism above the nation state level, such as a regional or global BI. The latter resembles the earlier position that argued capital is more mobile than people, especially regarding the least advantaged of poor societies. Hence, he sees border restrictions justified if global redistributive schemes were in place. Thus, the majority of these arguments conclude that border restrictions appear to be necessary in order to install BI. However, some endorse that redistributive mechanisms above the nation state should be sought if borders are closed, pointing towards the responsibility of the nation state outside its borders. Next step is to use the idea and illuminate it through normative theories of migration in order to figure out what obligations a BI introducing nation state would have in context of increased migration due to labor automation induced in BI. So basic income and migration. Different motivations to migrate could be found. Here, the concern lies with economic migrants, as migration due to humanitarian or political reasons is not the focus of this research. However, due to labor automation and BI, the term economic migrant is not necessarily understood as a migrant seeking to find a higher earning jobs, but rather to find subsistence in another country, which is capable of dealing with labor automation appropriately. As by definition, BI is universal and unconditional, appears to be only logical that there are hardly any justifications for working BI to someone that has settled up in a country. Thus, the debate is pushed to the borders and not to the naturalization process. The current international migration policy regime with respect to at least economic migrants reflects a clear dual-tier morality between outsiders and insiders of a state. Migration policies as developed countries are heavily driven by issues such as demographic transitions, a lack of skilled labor, human capital flight, as well as social integration and security issues. Therefore, immigration policies imply an economic rationale when selecting migrants that seek to enter for non-humanitarian reasons. Normative questions about migration inquire about one's moral obligation towards humans on a global level, on a national state level, and whether there's two-tier morality. Statists have represented by Miller argue a two-tier morality is justifiable as sovereign states are the best entities to provide welfare, protect human rights, and create shared identities. The emphasis on a political community's right to democratic self-determination. For Miller, people in many countries of this world see themselves as having certain national identity that shapes their perceptions of themselves and others, and hence demands to be included in the debate about borders. Consequently, a management of migration helps to preserve parts of public cultures and to adapt others in a controlled fashion. Another argument more different towards shared cultures is that political community within the nation state has a right of democratic association, which includes the right to determine whom to incur or exclude from the community. Thus, co-nationals have special obligations towards each other, but they do not have the same obligations towards people outside the nation state. Another study challenges the claim that democratic association justifies the unilateral imposition of border controls based on democratic theory and the notion of freedom as autonomy. If states are truly focused on popular sovereignty, they are not entitled to unilaterally impose border controls on immigrants if these coercively limit their autonomy. The reason for this is that, according to the democratic theory, if a policy is coercive and invades the autonomy of an individual, the affected individual has to be involved in the policy process. Consequently, the options for nations are either to allow freedom of movement, or if they want to impose borders, to ensure this is democratically justified by involving prospective immigrants in a policy process. Coercion here also includes preventive laws in terms of a threat of coercion. However, Miller criticized that prevention does not lead coercion, as a preventative law does not coerce everybody equally. Some might not even want to migrate. What this criticism is missing, however, is that even though no interference occurs, the imposition of borders already influences people's decisions on where or how to migrate. A preventive law can be seen as a form of domination without interference. In this situation, domination occurs because states have the unilateral power to exclude people. Domination by borders, in this case, does not occur equally, but varies in scope depending on how many people are affected by the domination, by intensity, depending on the arbitrariness of the domination, by extent. The extent of domination looks at which areas of one's life are being affected by borders. This is especially important given that labor automation affects the ability to generate economic subsistence and security. Economic migrants from countries affected by labor automation that lack the capacities to compensate for this might be extensively dominated by border restrictions, as they would be unable to access the preconditions for a flourishing life. To migrate, the domination induced by migrant restrictions, regulation on a global level should be established. These regulations should include participation options for those subjected to coercive border restrictions. As stressed by Iveson, it is relevant antonym of liberty for the Republican is slavery. Then the international sphere is also the refugee, asylum seeker, and the illegal immigrant or a queue jumper. What they lack is not only the ability to block or control for the arbitrary interference of others. There are no institutional arrangements forced to track their avowable interest, but also the capacity to make claims that obligate others. They lack the appropriate moral and political addressing. Quote above would therefore also include the migrant affected by labor automation, as he or she is not regarded to be an economic migrant, but rather a subsistent migrant, as jobs are reduced worldwide. In the absence of an institution that could contest the unilateral imposition of borders, this gives rise to a demand for international institutions that mitigate domination on a global scale. So it goes on. Here you got power relations, and they're going to talk about Germany. And I'm going to encourage people to read this. I read quite a bit of that because it was important and related to the issues at hand. I'm just going to submit some of these. I'm not going to have time to read them. Here is India Universal Basic Income Introduction. 70 years ago, then Prime Minister Nehru declared that newly independent India would endeavor to fight to end poverty and ignorance and disease. India has made giant strides since. Nearly 1 in 2 Indians were poor in 1951 compared to 1 in 5 today. New Delhi lifted more than 130 million citizens out of poverty between 1994 and 2012, but the scale of Indians' poverty challenge and its burgeoning population dwarfed the tremendous headway. India is still home to more of the world's poor than any other country, and economic disparities are growing across states, across social groups, and both urban. To address poverty, India has traditionally relied on a combination of fostering economic growth, providing basic public services like healthcare and education, and distributing a variety of subsidies, pensions, and cash transfers. Aware that the benefits of growth have been eluding India's neediest citizens and that service delivery has been erratic, the state has invested heavily in targeted welfare programs the last few decades. India's interest in using cash to alleviate poverty has grown. The concept of universal basic income has garnered renewed attention in advanced economies elsewhere in the world. The radical welfare reform proposal boasts a 500-year intellectual history, and so on and so on. So say that these concepts are spread all over the world. I don't have the time to talk about India's program. So I put this in Brundle's chat. Here is economic articles related to the feasibility of universal basic income. People want to learn more, I encourage you to read through that. Here's the Institute of Labor Economics policy paper series on basic income and public job offer, complementary policies to reduce poverty and unemployment, more about how to effectively implement the policy. This paper was interesting also. I'm not going to have time to go through it, just going to submit these, where we're talking about automation and the future work scenarios and policy options, where you have different ways that this universal basic income might end up being implemented. Here's another paper. Encourage people who want to know more about it to read. Free lunch with robots, can basic income stabilize the digital economy? Yet another paper I'm encouraging people to read. I skimmed through these, sped read them, but I'm not going to have time to read through them because I got to finish up in at most an hour. Strategic opening for basic income guarantee and its global crisis being created by AI robots, desktop manufacturing, biomedicine, by the Journal of the Evolution of Technology. Here's a Brookings Institute paper. What happens if robots take the job? The impact of emerging technologies on employment and public policy. So you get an interesting Brookings paper. Here's another paper. The Action and Research Center, Pathways to Universal Basic Income, the case for Universal Basic Opportunity Fund, different models for administering universal basic income. And okay, so let's talk about the global effect of this. So here I have the Sustainable Development Goals, the United Nations, SDG. I've been taking these courses online from edX. I'm even going to put that up, and you can see all these courses available for people who want to learn more about it. encourage you to take these courses. So Professor Lord Jeffrey Sachs, Bernie Sanders supporter, I think a Jewish convert to Catholicism, interesting, some of the biggest supporters. And so you can see all these courses available online related to the Sustainable Development Goals on edX, which could be related to, UBI. People would have more time to take these courses, and there's tens of courses related to the UN courses. So I'm encourage people to look through some of those courses. And I have a PowerPoint on these UN goals. So it'll give my voice a chance to rest. And while people could kind of look at the PowerPoint and see what's going on. The UN 2030 agenda. At the beginning of the new millennium, in 2000, world leaders gathered at the UN to shape a broad vision to fight poverty in its many dimensions. That vision was translated into 8 millennia development goals. The MGD framework has guided development work across the world for the past 15 years. These goals through 2015 eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, achieve universal primary education, promote gender equality, empower women, reduce child mortality, improve maternal health, combat HIV and AIDS, malaria, and other diseases, ensure environmental sustainability, and a global partnership for development. So that was 2000. So the 2030 Agenda, 2000 UN Conference on Sustainable Development in Rio de Janeiro, appeal made to formulate common goals and include these in the post-2015 development agenda. The MDGs did not consider environmental issues and new focus on sustainable development. So the goals democratic process involved all the member states of the UN, cooperation with major NGOs and civil society organizations, open forum and regional consultations around the world, survey of over 4.5 million people about the most important goals and how they might be achieved, collaborative wish for the world to create a better and more equal place to live in, around 5 million people involved in the process. So you can see the book and link it to the actual proposal. So the 2000 agenda as a preamble, declaration, the sustainable development goals, means of implementation, global partnership, follow-up and review. So the main goals focus on the 5 Ps: people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. They're interdependent. People and poverty in all forms, and hunger, achieve food security, improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture, ensure healthy lives, and promote well-being at all ages, ensure inclusive and equitable quality education, and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all, gender equality, planet and prosperity. I encourage people to read through these and take the edX courses. I'm going to rest my voice and just show some of these slides. So there are 17 goals. Hopefully people could read these. 169 targets agreed on the UN. These are, in fact, the international goals of the global humanity. Open data, different things affecting it. So you have a roadmap to development, different UN conferences. For example, Goal 16, promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, inclusive institutions at all levels. The Lyon Declaration, 2014, we call on all member states of the United Nations to acknowledge that access to information, the skills to use it effectively are required for sustainable development, and to ensure this recognized in the post-2015 development agenda. So these are official declarations of the UN. Articles, pictures. So people who want to read the different goals, so there's 169 of them. Sorry, 1 second. Sorry about that, my phone. I'm going to have to end the stream soon. There's a lot of information to cover. Okay, so I'm not going to be able to get through this all, but this is important, the UN regulations. So here is, I think I put in there already. I put the, the actual UN list of goals in the chat if people want to read more about it. But you see that really universal basic income, like we saw the pressures of migration, is going to have to be international and a certain way to implement that. So let's do another PowerPoint. Basic income, economic security. This another one in Canada, which has had more issues on it. Guarantee, social improvement, poverty. Basic income, believes that all Canadians should have universal and unconditional access to a regular income that pays for the basic necessities of life, such as food, clothing, and warm place to give, regardless of wages and earnings. There's two main types: a universal demo grant that we said in the reading, everyone eligible receives it irrespective of need. Then there's negative income tax focused on those whose income falls below a stated threshold to receive income support to bring them to that threshold. The three main problems: poverty, inequality, precarious labor, devastating impacts of poverty on people. Central to the rationale of basic income is to uphold and strengthen human dignity, to move away from stigmatizing, dehumanizing, inadequate, ineffective, inefficient forms of income security. So basic income allows people to choose better food and shelter, health and well-being, adequately nourished workers concentrate better, mistakes, accidents decline, productivity improves, children focus better on schoolwork, people seek more fulfilling work or undertake caring for elderly disabled family members. It would be kind of like the example, the most basic university income, programs on top of that, education, housing, medical support, and then on top would be actual labor income. So basic income is not the panacea. Really, there needs to be much more social programming on top of that. So the Manitoba Income Experience in the 1960s, we've covered this before. Henry David Thoreau, though I do not believe that a plant will spring up where no seed has been, I have great faith in a seed. Convince me that you have planted a seed there, and I'm prepared to expect wonders. So just some more basic slides. So I'm losing my voice, and I got things I have to do. So I'm trying to. I had one more presentation on automation, kind of like the different ways that automation might go. Let me go through this quickly. Automation in production systems, automation in manual labor, automation principles. So this is from a college course, globalization, international outsourcing, local outsourcing is all important things to understand. Contract manufacturing, trends, quality expectations, need for operational efficiencies, all these is important for the actual learning to code. How does automation work, which is actually something that I do and hopefully we'll deal more in depth with. The material handling, manufacturing systems, flexible manufacturing, quality programs, lean production. I don't have time to explain all these things, but they're extremely important. You have facilities, the factory equipment in the facility, and the way the facility is organized, and you have manufacturing support systems, the set of procedures used by a company to manage production, solve technical and logistics problems, and ordering materials, moving work through the factory, and ensuring that products meet quality standards. Plant layout, manufacturing system. Like I did the Siemens conference. This is relatively complicated and involved for engineering, and I'm not going to have too much time to go into detail of this because time is ticking. I got to run. But I'd been hoping to show these slides. So just reasons for automating: increase labor productivity, reduce labor cost, mitigate the effects of labor shortages, reduce or remove routine manual and clerical tasks, improve worker safety, improve product quality, reduce manufacturing lead time, accomplish what cannot be done manually, avoid the high cost of not automating. So 10 strategies for automation and process improvement: specialization of operation, combined operation, simultaneous operation, integration of operation, increased flexibility, improved material handling and storage, online inspection, process control and optimization, plant operation control, computer integrated manufacturing, automation migration strategy for introduction to new projects. Phase 1, manual production, single station man cells working independently. Advantages: quick to set up, low cost tooling. Phase 2, automated production, single station automated cells operating independently as demand grows and automation can be justified. In Phase 3, automated integrated production, multi-station systems with serial operations and automated transfer of work units between stations. In Phase 1, you would see the people involved. Phase 2 has less people involved, and Phase 3 becomes completely automated. And you may be able to time and look at some of the expectations of when this is going to come and how much it's going to cost in the current state of technology. So that's the last PowerPoint I had. I'm sorry. Really, this could be like a 5-hour stream, but I'm only going to be able to give it like 2.5 hours. It looks like Brundle isn't going to be coming on. It's probably fine. Maybe on his show this week we'll talk about it more. So let's look at one more PowerPoint. I'm glad I got 9 people watching. I appreciate you watching. I'm gonna have to read back the chat later. So introduction to universal basic income, and some of the pressure related to automation. Income inequality, highest it's been since the Great Depression. Technology disrupting labor space. Problems are getting worse. So we've said all that before. Technology disruption to labor spaces could be less of a disaster with basic income, give more people more time to learn to code or be productive in society. Could do part-time work in a gig economy, train, learn new skills, start your own company, spend more time with family, whatever pursuit you think is best. Paid for by diverting funds from other programs, taxes on resources. Eliminating poverty would actually save trillions of dollars, because the high expense of poverty on society, kind of like President Obama's arguments for Obamacare, the cost it takes when someone walks into the emergency room is a lot more current interest. Here was the Swiss basic income, where they dumped 8 million coins in front of Parliament. Economic sense. I didn't have time. This chart came actually from one of the papers I did on what kind of jobs are going to be automated. And, so you're going to see non-routine manual labor. This is very interesting, but there is a lot of data. Hopefully, I'm going to have to look at the McKinsey report quickly, but I am going to do that. That's the most interesting. I'm saving for last. Okay, we've seen a lot of this information before. I'm going to save here, the Nambia, where they did $7 a month in Africa. We talked about the UN global standards. In the US, it might be $1,000 a month. In Nambia, it was only $7 a month. Other states in India, $4 and $2 a month. These experiments in India. That we talked about migration pressures being changed by the universal basic income. The Alaska permanent dividend funds. It's currently at over $50 billion, the fund. So what's the path forward? Okay, yeah, I'm sorry to be rushing here. So let's look at this report. If people want to follow along, here's the link in the chat. I'll actually put that last that last one I did was a PDF, so I'll put that in the chat also if people have the time. I hope they could look along. So here is a KPMG on accelerating automation. 45% of activities individuals currently perform in the workplace can be automated using already demonstrated technologies. 60% compound growth in robotics industry. 55% of global corporations currently exploring new automation opportunities. So just show some nice graphics. People want like PowerPoints. Scaling up. So, benefits from automation. UK client base, significant global presence, and delivers back office function. The retailer's objective was to become fully compliant with a new regulatory framework, achieve better data quality, and reduce operational cost. And you look at the huge benefits, automation, almost 100% accuracy, data availability, reduced failure. Most failures due to human error. Okay, so hopefully people read through it. This one has like bullet points and nice graphics. And so I have one last PowerPoint, and this one's actually one of the best. I saved the best for last, and then the McKinsey report, which is very long. So I'll put this in the chat, the PowerPoint, and a lot of this has been covered before, so I'm not going to read through it again. It's a negative income tax, the different things. So a lot of this stuff we discussed before, but just to see it in nice slides. Look at the funding, economic mechanisms. There's some nice graphics that I'll talk through. Different fixing, floating, swap, variable income. These things are more complicated. I'm sorry, I don't have time to read through this all. I encourage people to put it all, the links in the chat. Labor share of income falling due to automation. Labor used to make a much larger share of income. The decline of workers' bargaining power, falling fortunes of the typical workers, all trends President Trump talked about should be well known to any of the people who've been following this. Decline in union power, decline in bargaining power, minimum wage laws, people running on raising minimum wage, but actually pressure to drive down minimum wage. So universal basic income proposals are often criticized because they're money for nothing, reduces incentive to work created by the urgent necessity to hold a job in order to feed one's children or make rent. That's a weak criticism, since much of the point of universal basic income is to reduce incentives to work, in particular in benign ways. In the language of economists, the core purpose of UBI is to shift the labor supply curve upwards, and we'll see the graph of that. Reducing incentives to work need not imply that fewer people work, reducing aggregate production. It can instead imply higher wages for the same quantity of work. The quantity of labor supplied is a function of the demand curve for labor as well as labor support, and the demand curve for labor is largely a public policy choice. So here's your typical supply and demand. And universal basic income would increase the wage of people. UBI shifts the labor curves upwards by increasing workers' reservation waves. This effect on its own leads to an increase in wages and a reduction in the quantity of labor supplied. So increase in labor demand as a policy choice, or potentially as a direct effect of UBI, if demand is unmanaged, restores the original quantity of work provided, but at significantly higher wages. So UBI is not meant as welfare so people could sit around and do nothing, but so that they could function at a higher level of productivity. So in theory, it leaves the marginal supply of labor effectively unchanged. In simple terms, this means that firms have to pay a fixed amount more to inspire the same quantity of work, but once this increment is paid, it is not more difficult for firms to inspire greater effort with further incentives. Unlike many other interventions that contract labor supply, the upshift in the market supply to increase take-home pay for workers, none of it represents effective taxation captured by the state. The net effect of the upward shift of labor supply is an increase in labor bargaining power. Workers hold out for better deals than they would without and capture all the benefit of those better deals. Better way of anti-poverty. We've discussed this more. The link for this is in the chat, so if people want to read through this, I encourage them to, or someone wants to do their own stream and uses a PowerPoint, I encourage them to. So there's no evidence today's winners work harder or need to work harder. For the extraordinary innovators of businessmen of the past, the vast increase in wealth that comes from a relatively few getting an even greater share of an even larger pie is not economically efficient, but simply a matter of happenstance. If this is right, then the economic case for changing our institutions to alter this happenstance not so great outcome is strong. Giving everybody a property right on an equal share of some portion of aggregate output is a facially fair way to change our institutions in a way that resonate and is consistent with our practice of modern capitalism. Humans engage in a lot of useful activity that does not generate short-term positive cash flows, but has the possibility for creating a great deal of real value over the medium to long term. Silicon Valley ecosystem of venture capitalists exists to fund a small sliver of those sort of activities by the very small sliver of humanity capable of networking to access it. Even for those people, the range of activities that are amenable to venture capital financing is very limited. Venture capitals cannot fund activities that will create huge swaths of value for which no means of monetization is foreseeable. So universal basic income would give nearly everyone the luxury associated with now fortunate few who by virtue of savings or family support can opt out of providing market labor for a while to pursue often more ambitious things. For now, a disproportionate share of technology and cultural innovation comes from this fortunate few. But there's no reason to think that due to the correlation between wealth and ability, the pace of development and wonderful new things could increase dramatically if nearly everyone had the option to sacrifice the comforts of good market income when an idea or opportunity truly making sacrifice in order to pursue it. So we discussed Hayek and investment substances earlier, the economic long history behind this. Escaping the macroeconomic floor, perceived economic problem throughout the developed world is secular stagnation. In very simple terms, modern developed economies typically use central bank interest rate policy to ensure that aggregate demand is sufficiently strong to fully employ available economic resources. Typically, central banks lower interest rates when they expect demand shortfalls by a variety of mechanisms. This is thought to increase near-term demand for goods and services. Secular stagnation refers to the situation in which, despite zero or near zero central bank policy rates, aggregate demand remains insufficient to fully employ the resources of the economy and production. Secular stagnation is attributed to a variety of factors: demographic change, technological stagnation, growing inequality. At or near the zero bound, central banks must resort to controversial, unconventional monetary policy like quantitative easing that seem to require very large doses to be effective and may have undesirable effects on financial stability and exacerbate wealth inequalities. Okay, so I encourage people to read through that and to see, socioeconomic cohesion, different benefits to this than they're in the papers that I've read, and I'm not going to have time to read all out loud, although it's worthwhile to read, and I wish I did have time to read this out loud because it'd be worthy just to have these words leave my mouth. So generalization. We require a community of people who agree to pool resources in order to finance UBI across its membership. Capacity and willingness of members of the community to generate exchange value in exchange for the tokens managed by the cryptographic application The exchange valuable would need to be recognized by members outside the community as well as reciprocally among members so that people can purchase goods and services not produced within the community. Willingness of members of the community who expect to produce disproportionately much exchange value to see some of the tokens received as a result of their work taxed to fund other people's basic incomes. UBI is first and foremost an insurance arrangement. Insurance arrangements function best when there is a complete ignorance about who is likely to experience relatively good or relatively bad incomes. From under a veil of ignorance, nearly all risk-averse humans voluntarily enter insurance arrangements to pool risk. Knowledge poisons insurance pools. If outcomes can be predicted, people for whom good outcomes are likely opt out of insurance schemes they will gladly have joined. Where they ignorant, this renders the insurance scheme untenable, as people likely to net pay into the program opt out, while people likely to make claims against the insurance have insufficient funds to draw upon basic insurance problems related to UBI. So regardless of knowledge, distributive incomes are often better when an entire community participates. Hence the arguments like for President Obama's universal health care. States can coercively enforce this participation by extracting premium taxes or imposing an individual mandate they can enforce as if ignorance to ensure viability of an insurance pool by eliminating the information on the basis of which insurers are permitted to differentially price. So the main challenge for cryptocurrency-based UBI schemes, so I mean, this person who put this together may have been based on cryptocurrency. Basic universal income will be an exceptionally useful addition to the conventional social democratic state policy mix for a variety of different perspectives. So I'm sorry I didn't have the time to read through that, and appreciate the people in the chat. This was like the magnum opus of the stuff I wanted to read through. I just got to check my social media. Okay, so this is the last thing I'm going to be able to cover, and this is the McKinsey report. This is the main thing I wanted to show. This has like awesome showings of what's coming in automation. So this is a 150-page report, and they have a lot of graphics that just look at some of the graphics. So if people are following in the chat. Let's first look at page 15. So hopefully if there's a few people in the chat following along, open the report to page 15. And I mean, report was from 2015, but it's still probably one of the most definitive reports or best graphics. So you're looking at what things are going to be automated away. And here we have like psychiatrists and legislators, close to zero of them will be automated away. As where rote things, almost 100% of them would be automated away, like sewing machine operators, graders, sorters of agricultural products. And so we're going to look in more detail about, even think about what's going to be automated away and what's not, and some of the reasons, and encourage people to read the whole report. So, management expertise as opposed to predictive physical activities or even predictive mental activities. And here's a nice, graphic about, for example, dividing in manage expertise, interface, unpredictable, physical, collect data, process data, predictable, the ability to automate, with red being automatable, blue not automatable. So, something like accommodation and food services, prediction is that 73% of that is automatable. Manufacturing, 60%, agricultural, close to 60%, retail trade, warehousing, transportation, mining, other services, about half of that will be automated. Construction, less than half. Utilities going down to wholesale trade. Even things like finance and insurance, 40% automated. Even art, entertainment, and recreation, think like artists, novels, literature, good chance that's going to be automated. Real estate, computers will do better than your person. You can punch that data, 40% automated. Administrative stuff. Educational services here is the less, only 27% of education being automatable. I'm going to encourage people to read through that. We've looked at some of the international data on that. I'm not going to have time to look at that. Here's something like a timeline. So here we're looking at, so this part up here in the orange is the current state of technology. So currently about 50% of stuff is technologically automatable. That currently 50% of this stuff could already be automatable, and the bottom is like the adoption rate. So just because the technology is there doesn't mean it's cheap or economically viable, or different reasons why it's going to take a while. So the process has already happened. We showed before, like Korea has 5 robots per 100 workers, and prediction is by 2050 almost everything, well over 90% of things will be technologically automatable. And by like 2070, it will caught up that basically everything's going to be automated. And, unless God forbid, like we kill each other. And, look at like manufacture and agriculture, historically just till today going down. There's a lot of good data in here. I hope people open this up and read it. This overview of studies. And technical potential, we saw the same chart. Here's an interesting, we're kind of dividing out what is automatable and what is not. So, Brundle, if you want to pop on, you can. I already gave you the link. And, if you want to talk through some of the McKinsey, or I'll be done in like 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and we could talk afterwards because I'm done. Maybe like 10 minutes, I got to talk and then I got to run. So you got things like sensory perception, cognitive capacities, natural language processing, social and emotional capacities, physical capacities. And a lot of these intellectual endeavors are actually highly automatable. So we're not just talking about physical labor, we're talking about intellectual endeavors. And, we get more into the studies we're going to see. So, hope that was page 45. So, really, you should read the whole thing. This chart on page 47 shows different correlation between different skills. So this is more mathematical and complicated about the technological feasibility of automating these, what we call machine learning, artificial intelligence. We can't really replicate the human mind, although machine learning can produce results better than the human mind. And so there's a lot of detail into this. So, here's like a percentage of time that people spend on different activities, recognizing known patterns, natural language generation, sense perception, as opposed to like generating novel patterns, creativity on the bottom that people don't spend much time on. So like chess playing, where I've been talking about in my rambles, where the computer could basically do these things for you. In the ancient days, the ancient mathematicians that had to spend years like making these tables, the computers could generate those instantly and allow people more of their free time for creativity and different things. Here's more, you're looking at labor market polarization, the technological automation potential for occupation families like food preparation. So here we're looking at automation potentials and, predictable physical activities is the bottom one. So you're going to have to look at this graph yourself. I encourage you on page 51. But we see the highly automatable fields to less automatable fields. Like management is still highly automatable. 20% is automatable. Cleaning, certain complex cleaning might not be automatable, but almost every field is going to be affected by automation, and some of them are going to be extremely automated. And this study goes into specific details that we're going to look at some exact 5 case studies. So here is hypothetical future state of highly automated emergency department, where you have people in the emergency room, doctors, and the type things that are going to be automated. And, I talked about, me and my brother decades ago, like dystopia, having chips in your hands or something. But hospitals will be highly automated, things like nursing and even doctors. So here it's saying 70% of the emergency room could be automated away. That 70% of the things that are currently done in an emergency room could actually be automated. And the other 30% would be, performance gain to other people. So hypothetical future state of highly automated aircraft maintenance, 66% labor substitution. You're looking at automated tugs, and even the inspections where you have like these robots and drones that have cameras and stuff like that. So these are just sample examples. Oil and gas, you're only looking at 15% labor substitution, although a big performance gain, although these places don't use much labor now already. So the labor substitution with the industrialization was high enough to replace most workers that the automation doesn't have too many people left to replace. Grocery stores, you have Amazon. Like I go to Kroger here locally. I usually use automated checkout, even carts. Not even having automated checkouts where you just take the cart home and it's automatically billed. So, please look at the McKinsey thing if people are going to different places. So you're looking at close to 70% labor substitution in grocery stores. And, intellectual field like mortgages. Okay, so that's all I got. I encourage people to read it. I'm actually going to take the risk, and I only got a few minutes, but I'm actually going to risk putting the link in the chat. I don't know if Brundle wants to come on. I appreciate people watching. I went a few hours. I didn't have enough time, unfortunately, to read as much as I did. I read at length, for almost an hour, reading at length from important papers, especially related to migration and the different theories. So I'm going to stay on for a minute or two and see if someone wants to join in. I only have a few minutes to chat. I don't know if Brundle is going to have like a big open stream, and it'll kind of be like, the blood sports where a bunch of arguments. This week I'm happy to participate, but I wanted to put the information out there for the people who are more academic. You could read through some of the papers and some of the PowerPoints, get some of the definitions, and the more evidence-based people. But in terms of how things work in reality, it's be appeal to authority and appeal to emotion to get the legislative, as they say, like how sausage is made is very dirty. And you could see the economists and technicians and experts have been producing their papers for many years. However, in terms of policy, it's, you got Yang Gang and Andrew Yang, who was in the Obama administration, made it more popular. And we'll see what the influence of that will be in, you've seen, I went over in Swiss and the Netherlands, and there are different times when there were, looked like, Brundle saying he's having a problem with the link. Add him in by email. Let me see if I could do that real quick, because what's your email again? I'm gonna go up and screen it. Get the boomer tech going on, and it say learn to code. As internet and technology gets better, you got to learn to code. You got the boomer tech. So I'm not sure if Brundle's gonna on Twitter. If he's not able, I might just have to end the stream and we'll have to talk a different time. Link should be working. If he's on his cell phone, it may not work. So unfortunately, I think I'm gonna have to end the stream. It's probably good. My stream is more intellectual. Brundle, obviously for reasons, Brundle will get 100+ viewers. Do if it's lucky to break 10 viewers. However, we're looking that's the idea of UBI. is that hopefully people, maybe Duva took high birth and was able to make larger sums of money with little work, or had parents who could support me, or community members who support me having relative leisure to research these things. And there's other people that, had they had more time, would actually spend the time reading these reports. Guys spent tens of hours reading all these reports, and then a few hours, going over some of the more important things here. And there might be a lot of people out there that, are on that S curve I put at the beginning, where they're struggling just to provide for their family, or, God forbid, unfortunately, Duvid hasn't been able to build up a family yet, and that also frees me up more time. But had people through automation or redistribution of wealth, universal basic income, might have more time to actually investigate these things and push forward. So hopefully, at least, Brundlefly will be able to watch this or read through some of the suggested readings, and other people who watch this show, and we'll be able to have a good discussion. Whether Greg Johnson wants to debate me or not, or whatever, that's fine either way. Like, I'm more an introvert, so these streams are more my speed. And, those larger streams usually get more messy. I'm willing to do it because I'm a man of ideas, and I'll take the risk to myself, or, whatever, to put myself out there to promote these ideas. But that's essentially not my personality. And, you could see, okay, all the time that I had to read these books, is that what you would have done if you had universal basic income, if you didn't have the leisure also? And, so hopefully this is the opening of a discussion. I did this one kind of right away because of the possibility of the discussion with Greg Johnson on Brundle's channel. The next one I plan on doing is actually going to be on hate speech and the First Amendment and freedom of speech laws. People could get and understand, what are the terms of service, why are people getting kicked or deplatformed, what are the different regulating bodies that regulate different things, for example, like the public airways, newspapers, what a person just says in public versus on platforms, and the directions like Josh Smith had talked about, and possible legislation making these platforms a utility. And so that will probably be my next stream. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and got a lot accomplished today. And I'd read through some of these reports multiple times. I'll watch over this myself. I'm probably going to be busy till later tonight, like 7 or 8 o'clock, that I'm going to have time to go back and timestamp this. So, but within the next day, I will timestamp and add the links in the chat, in the description, so people could just go to the parts they find interesting and have the reading material readily available to them. And I'm not sure when Brundle's going to organize a larger stream that will have more people, or more kind of like formal debating and arguing, and maybe we could even get some people that know more about the topic and have done more research. That a lot of times people learn better from more confrontational debates where people take different sides. So yeah, I'm willing to to do that. And I'm going to sign off. God bless everyone. I'm going to an event later today, actually, this scholar of the history of Hasidim in Poland. And yeah, thanks, Pat. Like, I purposely read through the whole thing on the history to get the long frame philosophical background and the history of the evolution of ideas, connecting it to technology and other things. So in terms of long frame history, there's a scholar from Poland about the growth of Hasidim, and he wrote this book. It's actually expensive. I haven't bought it it's called the Historical Atlas of Hasidus. So I'll just do a quick screen share, and I'm not sure if they're going to allow me to film or live stream it. I would. The university sometimes themselves does it. So if the university isn't filming it and they is filming it, it'll eventually be on the University of Michigan page. If not, I'm going to ask them if I could film it. So the Historical Atlas of Hasidim, going back hundreds of years, and you have these demographic maps of the origins of Hasidim, where they grew until today, and the new thing is putting in these kind of friendly maps and graphics. So that was one of the reasons why I had to rush this stream, and I got to go take care of a few things like Duvid the landlord, Duvid the property manager. So I got to take care of a few daily things, and so hopefully this will lead and spark off to more public discussion. So God bless everyone. I'm studying my words. It's hard to talk. Just the experience of speaking for a few hours is good. Also, public study session, to be able to put your mind to one topic for multiple hours, and relation to a lot of my other public study sessions and streams on consciousness or speed reading. People who deny speed reading, Duvid breaks the book, so to say. I think I proved speed reading works. I think I could read possibly as much as 1,000 words a minute and get almost as much out of it. So go back to these streams. Possibly use your time that might be allotted by universal basic income to increase your intellect. Study techniques like speed reading and logic and different things that will improve your intellectual ability to acquire more and more information, and hope to continue with this. God bless everyone.